IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is signing day, and wow, this is going to take on a little different tone than it was originally going to. I've been very positive on this class. There's a lot of things I like about the class, but just down the stretch, you just didn't quite have the finish we thought we were going to have from this Notre Dame coaching staff. And then, bam, today we get the surprise that Madden Faramo had committed to Notre Dame. We're going to break that down. We're going to break down the whole class. We're going to talk overview, what I like, what I don't like. I'm going to talk biggest risers, guys that maybe didn't quite have the senior years that we thought. I'm going to grade each position group. And within that, I will give you my grades of each player. And then we'll do a 2-year look at the end, Trev, where we are going to look at how you guys know I love to do this, but sort of like how do they have graded over a 2-year span? So it just kind of gives a deeper look into the Hall. And I'm going to have some fun with this one. We're going to also, there were 4 super chats that were given to us last night that we did not get a chance to get to. We will bring those up actually at the very beginning because I apologize for not getting to those last night. We'll definitely get to those. And then I also wanted to bring something up here real quick, Trev, before we get to our ad read. Our guy, Peter Freibert, who has not been in the show for a while, he said, first show in 6 weeks, daughter has been sick in the hospital and is finally back to 100%. Praise Jesus for that. Brian, I really enjoyed your post-game podcast on the USC game. Nicely done by you and your team. We appreciate that, Peter, and we are glad that you have been able to catch up on our shows, man. But we are so thankful and so grateful that your daughter is back healthy. I'm not a parent, so I can't even imagine what you're going through. But I remember when we were going through our stuff with Rita. I can only imagine what it's like when it's actually your human child's, man. So we are so thankful that she is back and good to go, and you are back with us for a live show, man. So that is certainly a tremendous blessing for us to talk about and to be thankful for. Just makes this day even better, my man. No doubt about it. So thank you for sharing that with us, Peter.
Yeah, Peter, glad to hear that everything's all good with your daughter and you're back in action. I know this is your first show in about 6 weeks, so glad to have you with us, man. So, Brian, before we jump into it today, we got to talk about our friends over at MyBookie. So if you are unfamiliar with our friends over at MyBookie, they are a sports book and one of the best in the business. So when you go and sign up, make sure that you use promo code IRISH, IRISH. And what that's going to do for you is it's going to double your deposit bonus, which means if you deposit $10 into your account, MyBookie is going to credit you with $10 additional for you to spend on sports betting. Now, if sports betting isn't your thing, they also have a live casino. So if you like going out to casinos, you want to go and play some Friday night blackjack with MyBookie, that is something you are also able to do as well. Now, another thing that MyBookie has going on is their risk-free Thursdays. We have that coming up tomorrow. Take advantage of that for Thursday night football. The Detroit Lions are taking on the Green Bay Packers in an NFC North matchup, so I highly suggest taking a look at some of the lines that have came out. And if you lose, you get your money back, which is fantastic. Thus, the risk-free. If you don't know where to find that, it's under the My Bet Boosts tab in MyBookie. Also, be sure to enroll in their loyalty rewards program. What that's going to do for you is it's going to earn you extra cash and reward you just for placing down some bets. So be sure to check out our friends over at MyBookie. They're the sports book that gives you the tools to win and rewards you for every moment of play. So, Brian, big recruiting day.
Yeah.
Big recruiting day. But before we hop into it, like you mentioned, we do have some super chats to go through. Super chats from yesterday.
Yes. So Eric Santini with a super chat. Thank you so much, Eric. He said, same people who bring up NIU and not Notre Dame's wins only bring up Bama's wins and not getting blown out by a 6-6 team a week ago. That is spot on. And just pretend they're just like retconning that whole loss like it didn't even happen. This is from our conversation last night about the college football playoff. So, Eric, you are spot on. Also, the super chat from Sean Michael says, Brian and Trev, thanks as always for the best content on the beat. Thank you for that. I agree the committee has SEC bias. I'm ready. Bring on the tide. Go Irish. I also agree with that. Absolutely. So ICURN with Irish luck. So Ohio State drops 5 spots after losing to a horrible Michigan team. Actually, they only dropped 4. And Clemson drops the same after losing to South Carolina. ACC has a winning record against the Big Ten. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I agree. It's not quite that simple because it's looking at the overall resume, and then Clemson now has 3 losses. But yeah, I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke. It's also like an anti-ACC bias. It's not even like only pro Big Ten, pro SEC. It's also anti-ACC and anti-Big Ten or Big 12, which is a joke. Then another one from ICURN with Irish Luck. The way they are playing, think SC has a better chance of making a run than IU and Alabama. I would disagree with that. Indiana had one bad game against a really good Ohio State team who matches up very well against Indiana. And then Indiana went out the next week and beat Purdue 66-0. So I'm going to and I think that Indiana has a better defense than USC as well.
Yeah.
So no, I Bama maybe, but not USC. Not USC, or I mean, not Indiana. So those are the super chats, and I apologize for not getting to those last night, guys. But I just, you guys gave us those super chats, and I didn't want to just completely ignore them, and it's my bad for getting them up. But now, Trev, we can get to some recruiting talk.
It's a big day, Coach. Big day, and an awesome day to be an Irish fan. So we're gonna kick off everything with the biggest breaking news of the day. I would say is Notre Dame got the commitment and he signed. Madden Faremo is now a member of the 2025 Notre Dame recruiting class. So, Brian, initial thoughts, takeaways with Madden Faremo coming to South Bend.
Well, I mean, just, Notre Dame so very rarely has these kind of signing day surprises, right? It's always the other way around. It's the Peyton Bowens and it's those type of things that are usually the signing day surprises. Notre Dame doesn't often land a kid on signing day that we're not expecting to land. They've landed kids on signing day, but it's normally kids that we got a pretty good idea that they were going to sign with Notre Dame. And so a little backstory on this one. So as I've said on the board for months, Notre Dame was the team to beat for Madden Faremo for a long time. And to the point, I wrote a commitment article after the Florida State visit. That's what the sources were feeling. I mean, that was the only kid that I wrote a commitment story for just to have ready. And, everybody I talked to, he loves it. He wants to be here. He fits in great with the players and all that. And then even going into this past weekend, I felt the same way. And then kind of coming out of the weekend, the story started to turn a little bit. So I reached out to my sources and I said, what's going on? And I had a lot of different sources telling me different things. The Notre Dame recruits still felt like they were going to get them, but the coaches and some people that I was told were a little less hesitant, and then, optimistic. And then a lot of the USC excitement came. And really, what it came down to, Trevor, was this: is Madden loved everything about Notre Dame, but was having a little trouble pulling the trigger with going all the way to South Bend, Indiana from California. And that's really what it boiled down to. And honestly, Kingston had the same problem last year. The only difference is Kingston, his decision was more in the summer, but it was the very similar thing with him. And that's why for a while there was a lot of USC people that thought they had a really good shot with Kingston. And then it came down to Notre Dame and Ohio State. He finally got over that. But I think that's something that really impacted him. And I wasn't told this, but I have to think this also is in the back of his mind. This is a kid who's not afraid of competition, but you also look at that USC receiver linebacking core and you're like, dude, I'm walking into that lineup day one and playing a bunch. Whereas Notre Dame is going to have to earn a little bit more. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame was able to win it. And there's a couple things that they did to win it. No, one thing that was Notre Dame did, and the other thing is kind of bad luck for USC. But for Notre Dame, it's just they really emphasize, remember why you wanted to be here in the first place. Remember why we were your leader for so long. And Coach Freeman kind of hinted about that conversation. He actually let a little bit of that conversation out today in his press conference. He talked about how he said to him, choose hard. That's exactly what he's talking about, because this is the harder choice for a kid that's in California. It was harder for Kingston to choose Ohio State or Notre Dame than it would have been for him to choose USC, which would have been a much easier path to playing time, closer to home. Family can always be there. Kingston chose hard, and that was the message to Madden as well. And again, it's not about choose hard, like don't be afraid of competition. Madden Faremo is not afraid of competition. Neither is Kingston. If he was afraid of competition, he never would have considered Notre Dame in the first place. So battled there, and so Coach Freeman gave a little insight. But then the other thing that I believe, talking to sources, was sort of the final straw in Notre Dame's favor was the linebacker coach, Matt Entz, who did a great job on USC's end of recruiting Madden. Just did a phenomenal job recruiting him hard, staying in it. I mean, there was a time when USC was behind, in my opinion, was not only behind Notre Dame, was behind Texas for Madden Faremo over the summer. Kept hammering away, did a great job on his recruitment. And then late last week, you started hearing some rumblings that he might be a candidate for the open Fresno State job. Because if you remember, I believe Jeff Tedford was it this offseason, right? Retired because of health issues. And so they've had an interim coach the whole year. And so they're looking to hire a new coach. And he was rumored to be a leading candidate. Well, it came out this morning that he was likely going to get it. It's going to be his job. And I think that was sort of the final straw for him, not final straw, the final weight on the scale that tipped things in Notre Dame's favor, I believe. And I actually got word from a couple different people. So I got word from actually Ryan texted me and said, hey, I'm hearing this from the USC side. So then I started reaching out to some of my Notre Dame folks because I thought it was a done deal. I was told last night that Notre Dame didn't think they were going to get him. And say, we're still fighting, but it's not looking good. So I wasn't really thinking a lot about it today. And so then I talked to Ryan, and then I talked to a couple of sources, and they're like, look, we think we're going to get him. And so then I hit the intel piece, and it didn't publish right away. Didn't know that. And then I went back into it again and added a little piece that I had just gotten some intel, hit publish, and then saw like either right before or right afterwards, Madden had committed or had signed. So, and Coach Freeman announced at the beginning of the press conference. So it was really an interesting deal where Notre Dame led. Then all of a sudden there's that last second USC push. And then all of a sudden Notre Dame is back on top. So just a huge pickup for Notre Dame. And honestly, it's big because number one, it helps just the emotional momentum of recruiting. That one of the biggest issues we have as fans is we tend to allow the most recent aspect of recruiting to taint the class. And that could be positive or negative. You could get a couple late strong finishes and think the class is better than it actually is. I would make that argument about Michigan's class, to be honest. They had a great finish with some elite players, but there's some holes in that class. And then you look at Notre Dame and you're like, well, that's a really good class, but it didn't finish strong, especially losing Madden Faramo, which is the expectation. Like, it just didn't finish. And that sort of put a negative spin a little bit on what the class is going to be, and a legitimate spin because I felt like they were just one linebacker away from having a complete defensive class. And this class was going to be driven by the defense. And then once he jumps on board, you're like, all right, you now have a big time top 100 player on the defensive line. You now have a big time two top 100 players on linebacker. And of course they have, in my evaluation, 3 top 100 players in the secondary, and all 6 of the secondary players graded out as 4-star players on my board. So just a very strong finish and just a great feather in the cap for Marcus Freeman to land Madden Faramo and just really top things off with this 25-man. So in the last week, people talk about they didn't finish well. Well, in the last week, they signed one of the best linebackers in the country and also flipped the top kicker in the country who can kick, punt, and kick off. So I think the finish was a little better than maybe we give it credit for. They landed Nolan James down the stretch. They flipped Scrap Richardson during the end stretch. They ended up getting Brandon Logan during the season. And so that's kind of where it's at. So, and somebody saying like, that's not what was reported yesterday. Yesterday, I can back Ryan on this because yesterday, every bit of intel on the Notre Dame side and the other side was he was going to probably pick USC. So things change sometimes, folks. And instead of trying to call people out, how about you just enjoy the fact that the Notre Dame staff fought their butts off and pulled this one out at the end? Because that's exactly what happened. When they woke up this morning, it was not looking like he was going to pick Notre Dame. And ultimately he did. So it's a huge win for Notre Dame. And just put a great feather on what has been a very strong Notre Dame class. And we'll break all that down here. But I just wanted to kind of get a little bit into the Madden Faramo commitment trap, because this is a big time player. I mean, this is a top 100 player, not just on my board, right? Because sometimes people don't believe me, which is fine. But he's a top 100 player by Rivals. He's a top 100 player by ESPN, and he's a top 100 player by 247 Sports. So, that's a big pickup.
Yeah.
Big pickup for Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's a fantastic get. I think that it is a testament to Marcus Freeman and his staff. And it's one of those situations where you're never out of it until you're out of it. You know what I mean? So I think it's a testament to Marcus Freeman and his recruiting prowess and how he has been known as being a player's coach and being able to draw people into South Bend and be a part of what he's building. And I think it's fascinating. Recruiting is the aspect of this job that I'm still kind of getting my feet wet to and trying to learn as much as possible. And I think one of the most fascinating things is back before I was kind of in the weeds with this stuff, it was, well, why would you not want to come play at Notre Dame? And look at what they're building and look at what the school can do for you. Look what the university can do for you after you graduate. And sometimes you kind of take out of it that these kids are moving all around the country and making a big life-changing decision at 18 years old, and I think the Madden Faremo situation kind of sheds a little light on that, because it is a factor having to move completely across the country to go to a different school where you're not going to see your family that much. So, hats off to Marcus Freeman and his staff for being able to lock down one of the best linebacker recruits in the country. So it's really exciting stuff, and it's awesome to see moving forward, Brian. It's really awesome.
And again, just at linebacker, you're adding a guy that's an impact player, right? And the momentum of it is important. That is big. It's a momentum builder for Notre Dame, and maybe not so much from a national recruiting standpoint, but from a fan reaction, and that matters, because we're going to break it down. This is a good recruiting class, but a lot of people following recruiting is a very emotional existence, right? You're always riding a roller coaster, because people who just don't really want to ride that roller coaster just don't follow recruiting a whole bunch. The people that do follow recruiting, they ride that roller coaster, and it's kind of like when you're on a roller coaster, Trevor, it's like your emotions are going to vary depending on what part of the roller coaster you're on.
Right.
There's the anticipation, then the here we go, and then boom, and then all those feelings, and then you get like, okay, this is pretty nice. It's a nice little easy turn, and then oh my gosh, we're going again. You know what I mean? And that's what recruiting is. And a lot of times, you go on a great ride, and like say halfway through the ride is fun, and then the last half of the ride is like, well, it's kind of lame. Like you kind of that end feeling is what you're going to be thinking about, not like how great the first half of the ride was. And that's kind of what had happened. And then so it kind of tainted the class in the feelings of fans, right? And there were some areas where it wasn't as strong as it needed to be, which we'll talk about. And that's some of those are still true. But when you have this kind of finish where 2 days ago you flipped the number one kicker in the country, and then today you flip one of the best linebackers in the country, if not the best linebacker in the country, that's going to put a huge sort of a emotional sort of like put some air into that balloon, so to speak, right? Just an emotional boost to finish this class. And it's a big one. It's a real big one. So
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, man. Well, we're going to dive more into Madden Faremo and his commitment and his signing and what it means for this class. But Brian, let's take a look at this class overall. You had mentioned that it was already a really good recruiting class, and then Notre Dame made a good push at the end. So let's dive into what, some of your initial thoughts are on the 2025 recruiting class, now that I believe all of the players that they had and committed have signed.
Yeah, because Josiah Kia signed a couple hours ago. He was the last one that's going to sign, because the way it works is you can't officially send in your paperwork till 7 a.m. where you live. So he's in Hawaii time. So I don't think he could commit until I think noon, 1 o'clock. I'm not sure what the difference is in Hawaii, but that's why Chris Burgess and Joseph Reif and guys like that didn't sign until 8 a.m. Eastern. And that's why Creed Thomas didn't sign till 9 a.m. Eastern. It's because he's in mountain time out in Phoenix. So that's pretty much how it works. Just overall class, Trevor, it's another strong class for Marcus Freeman. I think adding Madden Faremo allows you to now say this defensive class can stack up with any that they've landed the last couple of years. I don't think the offensive class is quite there yet, and we'll talk more about that. But just overall, you added depth to the class, you added impact talent to the class, and you hit some holes. You filled up some holes with impact talent and depth at some very important positions. Like right now, if you look at Notre Dame's roster, the starting cornerback position has been a strength this year, all season. The starting safety position this year has been a strength all season, right? I mean, just is. But the problem is the depth wasn't there. And that's why Christian Gray runs an interception back 100 yards, and they have to put him right back on the field. And instead of giving him if Benjamin Morrison was still healthy and he picked that off, and you had Leonard Moore, you had Christian Gray, I promise you Benjamin Morrison would have come off the field, or Christian Gray would have come off the field, and Leonard Moore would have stepped in and taken those reps if there weren't the injuries, or whoever those depth players. Jaden Mickey would have come in that instance and played had he not quit the team. There's no depth. And safety is another position that needed an influx of talent. So, like when you look at how it's about, there's two things you got to do, Trevor, really to be successful in recruiting, and it really comes down to this. And I don't care where the players are from, but it comes down to this: like adding a top linebacker from California does not make this class better than it would have been if you'd added a comparable player from Indiana or Illinois or Kentucky or Ohio. It's the talent's the one that matters. But they did get a kid from California, but it looks, you look at it and say, okay, did you meet your depth needs? Did you meet your numbers needs? Are you going to come up short? Because one of the issues that we had with the way recruiting went before Marcus Freeman, and this isn't a shot at Brian Kelly, this is also true during the Charlie Weiss era and in the Ty Willingham era. This has been an issue for a long time, is they would have one of two mistakes. One is they would just strike out completely in certain spots. Like there was a year under Kelly where Notre Dame did not sign a single receiver. Another year where they signed 2 receivers and neither of them ended up staying at receiver. There were other years where like you remember in 2015, they signed 4 defensive tackles. It was, I think, Jerry Tillery, Micah Treadway, Brandon Tiassam, and Elijah Taylor. Yeah. And they only signed 1 defensive end in Bo Wallace, and then he got basically his admissions was revoked. So they signed they were already short with him. And then you go out in 2016 and you sign this great defensive end class. You get Dalen Hayes and Khalid Kareem and Julian Akwara and Jameer Jones and Adi Takumba Ogundeji, and you sign 0 defensive tackles. Right? Like that's the stuff we would see all the time. Or you'd sign a couple running backs, but they weren't that good. You know, I mean, I love Sebo Flemister and Jameer Smith, but they weren't Notre Dame caliber backs.
Right.
And for a while, that was kind of what was going on with Notre Dame in this class as well, but they were able to finish that one strong. In this class, really, Trevor, as I look at it, there's not a single position now that they got for Ramo where you were short on numbers. Not one. And you can say, well, I don't like receiver recruiting. All right, cool. We'll get to that. But right now, if you look at it from a number standpoint, you signed 3 receivers. That was the minimum number you could be okay with, especially now in the portal era. They wanted 4. They would have taken 5. But 3 was the number that they had to get to, so they met their numbers needs. And then you evaluate, okay, but did they land impact talent? Well, that's the second part of the equation. At that particular position, and again, we'll get into it more. I'm just using an example. It's, okay, you met your numbers, good job, but you didn't get to the impact talent that you needed. And that's the 2 ways of evaluating classes. And when I look at this, Notre Dame graded out well at every single position in regard to hitting their numbers. They hit their minimum numbers everywhere, and that's why you got this 25-man class. Now, did they get as big of a class as they wanted? No, they wanted to get up to 27, 28. But they wanted to add 1 more D lineman, didn't get it done. Wanted to add another receiver, didn't get it done. There was a couple tight ends they sniffed around. And one they passed on, one they ended up not getting. They couldn't take him. He had some academic issues. But you still met your minimum numbers needs. And that's why they didn't, like when they missed on the last couple receivers, they didn't kind of panic and go after some new guys because they're like, we're not going to add guys, just add guys. We'll go to the portal and try to do this again next year in 2026. And so that's the thing is impact talent. You landed several impact talent players. You landed depth work at all the places you needed it. And that's something to be kind of fired up about, Trev. And as I'm breaking down the class, if you want to talk about my grades and regarding to impact talent, Notre Dame landed 1 5-star player in Will Black. They landed 2 top 50 players, in my opinion, in Jadon Blair and Dallas Golden. And then they landed other top 100 players. Anthony Sack is a top 100 player. Mark Zachary's a top 100 player. James Flanagan's a top 100 player on my board. Chris Burgess is a top 100 player. I have not finished my grades for Madden for Ramo. He was on the cusp of top 50, but I've got to go through and watch his latest senior film. So I didn't do that this weekend because I didn't think they were going to get him. And so, but he was on the verge. He was right outside top 50 off junior film. And I watched his senior film today again, just some highlights, not actual film. And I'll be surprised if he doesn't jump into top 50 when I'm done with it, but he's not officially there yet. So that's impact talent. So 30-year class graded out as top 100 players or better. And then there's a couple other guys that are in that top 150 range. I actually have Nolan James in the top 150 range at running back. I love Nolan James. So I have Cree Thomas as a top 150 player who had great senior film. He's borderline top 100 on my board. And, and then there's a lot of top 250 caliber guys. And so it's a strong class. There are positions where you wish they could have been a little bit better, but even those positions are still good. They're just not elite. And we'll flush that out a little bit more when we get into the grades. for the class.
Yeah, the biggest thing that stands out to me if I'm looking at this class overall is Notre Dame went and addressed what they needed to your point, Brian, from a number standpoint. You go and you look and they signed 7 defensive backs, 4 safeties, 3 corners. And then you look at how that relates to this team this year. Am I incorrect on that?
6 defensive backs.
I have Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Cree Thomas, Jadon Blair, Anthony Saka, Ethan Long, Brandon Logan.
Anthony Sack is a linebacker.
Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't know if they were bringing him in for safety or if it was another
he's a linebacker. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Sounds good. So regardless, 6 defensive backs, and you go and you look at the state of the union in Notre Dame's defensive back room right now, and you could make the argument that it is extremely top heavy because there's not a whole lot of depth behind it right now. And so you look at who's coming in there. So you look at things like that. You're going to have 3 transfer portal wide receivers that are leaving that are all seniors in Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Harrison. And then you're going to replenish that with 3 wide receiver recruits that are coming in. I know we're going to dive into that a little bit later. And then, of course, they're remaining and keeping the trenches built up and signing probably – I don't know from a number standpoint what their goal was for offensive linemen. It's already an extremely deep room as it is right now, especially going into 2025. But they had 4 good offensive linemen, and you said that they wanted to add an additional defensive lineman as well.
Yeah, like they wanted a higher level impact guy.
Yeah.
They weren't going to add a guy just to add a guy. They felt they needed another impact player and came very close with Jalen Wiggins. It just came down to it where the relationships at Florida, once they recommitted to that staff, were just too long standing. So that's ultimately why they ended up not getting him. But they were close. But it doesn't matter if you're close. Close, almost getting a guy doesn't equal sacks for your team. Doesn't equal tackles for loss. And, so like when you look at overall kind of the things that you like about the class, Trevor, I think it's a phenomenal defensive class as a whole. I think it's an excellent offensive line class. I like the backfield pickups, especially after what you got last year. Getting a kid like Nolan James to follow up with Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams. Getting a kid like Blake Hebert to follow up with, from CJ Carr, I really like. You got an elite tight end. You haven't signed an elite tight end in a few years. You've signed good tight ends, but not an elite tight end. And so that was obviously big. And the secondary class is as good as I've seen at Notre Dame since Lou Holtz is the head coach. I mean, it's not even close. This is an elite class. And you're looking at the linebacker class and you're like, you signed 2 top 100 kids.
Yeah.
And then there's one kid, Josiah Key, I just don't have a strong opinion on yet because there's so little film. So I kind of have an incomplete grade on him right now because there's just not a lot of film. A lot of what I feel about him is more relaying what people I know and trust are telling me. I have someone that coaches out in Hawaii that I know really well. Talked to him this morning again about Josiah. Said great motor, plays hard, can run, smart, all those type of things. But there's just not a lot of film for me to say I'm super fired up about him. But I know Notre Dame's excited about him and has been for a while. And then you land the 2 top 100 kids. So there's just a lot of really strong aspects of the class. And then you talk about the things that aren't going to grade out as high. And we'll get into more specifics when we get into the grades, Trev. But when I look at this class, receiver should have been better, could have been better. There's no question. I grade Elijah Burris and Scrap Richardson out as top 250 players, 4-star top 250 players. And I'm going to have a section here in a second where I'm going to talk about my biggest risers in the class. And Jerome Bettis Jr. is one of my biggest risers in the class. I liked his senior film. But you're Notre Dame. You can't have your best receivers in the class be top 250 because those are good football players. I'm glad they're coming to Notre Dame. They can play at Notre Dame. The comparison that I made with Elijah Burris is kind of like he's like a Lad McConkey type, where not quite as fast, but similar. We're just great route runner, not the biggest guy. He's not going to put up 1,000 yards and just dominate, but he's just going to be a good football player and a guy that you're like, you can't guard that guy. He may not be running a million goal balls and post routes in college, but he's just a really good football player. But Lad McConkey needed Brock Bowers. He needed I'm drawing a complete blank on the kid that went to Texas.
A.D. Mitchell.
Yeah, I was going to say Thomas. I was like, no, that's not right. He needed those dynamic weapons around him. You think of a sort of like a different role, but like you think of that really good Clemson team back in 2016 or 2018, I should say, excuse me, where you had a really dynamic receiving core with Justin Ross and T. Higgins, and everybody remembers Hunter Renfrow, but everybody forgets about Amari Rodgers, who had 55 catches for 575 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, Amari Rodgers and Elijah Burris are different style of players. The comp isn't as them as styles. It's more of, yeah, you've got to have your studs, but you need that number 2, number 3, number 4 type of guy that are really good football players. And that's what they signed in this class. And so the issue that I have is you look at it and say, and again, it drives me crazy sometimes. I'm making a comparison of the role that they would fit. I'm not saying they're direct comparisons as players. There's a difference. But you still need that number 1, that dude, right, that guy, and they didn't get that at receiver in this class. And you say, yeah, but they were a great team this year. That I understand all that, but you want it just because you Michigan won without a number 1 receiver, fine, that's great. But I would rather have one, and you're even better imagine if you have a great O-line and a great quarterback and great running backs and great tight ends and then you also land a stud receiver. That's where they need to get to. Those are the aspects that they're getting a lot of really good number 2s and a lot of good number 3s and good depth players. But they're not getting that number 1 guy. You got Cam Williams last year, even the year before. I love Jaden Greathouse, love Jordan Faison, but they're not that dude.
Yeah.
They're not Will Fuller. They're not Michael Floyd. They're not Golden Tate. They're not that guy. And that's what's missing from this class. You talk about the biggest list, right? They're not getting those guys. And some of you, I know that Will Fuller wasn't that coming in, but I'm not going to assume that someone is going to be him if we don't evaluate it that way. So I can only evaluate what we know. And what we know looking at this class is they did not get that type of player. Does somebody want to try to tell me that Elijah Burris or I'm not even going to go. I'm not going to let people distract me today. It just drives me crazy sometimes. Like I understand it. Did you think, let me calm down. Just kills me, So, but anyway, Trev, there's not that kind of guy in this class. There's good, what's happened in the receiver class is you have some people that are just going to always turn everything into a positive and say, and then there's other people that are going to say, oh, it sucks, it's not good, you can't win. I'm like, okay, neither of those are factual. It's in the middle. It's a good receiver class. Scrap Purchase is a good player. Elijah Burris is a good player. Jerome Bettis is ascending. But it's not a class that you're going to say, we're going to beat Alabama, we're going to beat LSU, we're going to beat Clemson, we're going to beat Ohio State, we're going to beat Texas. You're going to beat those teams because of your wide receivers, based on what we see of the class. Could some guys end up being better than we think? Sure, I guess. I don't know what I would have graded Will Fuller out coming out of high school because I didn't evaluate that class because I was coaching that year. But I had a buddy of mine who thought that he was the best pickup in that class. So some people thought that. There's a reason why Notre Dame flipped him from Penn State. But there's nobody that you look at and say, like Leonard Moore. I gave Leonard Moore a 4.5-star upside grade as a top 50 player. And I said, if he would have played more of a senior year, he probably would have got a 5-star upside grade. You had Benjamin Morrison as a top 100 player. You can evaluate guys that aren't ranked high by other people and say, no, that's a dude. And none of those guys grade out that way. Good football players, but they're not that. And that's what's missing. And then the same thing on the D-line. This is a good defensive line class. You got depth. You got some size. Love Christopher Burgess. But there's no guy that I look at and say, that guy's Bryce Young, or that guy's going to be Boubacar, or that guy's going to be, that twitchy elite edge rusher. There's some guys that had good senior years. There's some guys I didn't grade real high when they committed that I like a lot better now, which we'll get into when we talk about the risers. But when you look at this group, it's a good class. It's not a class that you're going to say, you're going to go beat Bama. You're going to go beat Georgia. You're going to go beat Texas. You're going to go beat Ohio State. You're going to go beat those teams because of your D-line class. It's not that, right? You got one that could be that, and Chris Burgess, and some other guys that are low floor, high ceiling guys. And is that going to be enough? Well, if you land those type of classes enough back to back, eventually somebody's going to hit, right? But like last year's class and this year's class complement each other well, which we'll dive more into, because last 2 years is more about the upside. This year there's There's a couple guys that have a little bit higher floors, a little bit bigger bodies and things like that. But again, that's another area where I think recruiting can get better at those positions. And outside of that, I was very pleased with this class. Everything else was pretty good to really, really good in this class. And even those two positions, though, Trev, those are good classes. They need to be better. That's going to be the key. And that's what they need to do in 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. You need, starting off from RIP, you need that top end player that you can look at that and say, hey, potentially day one, he comes in and changes what this position group looks like. And I'm with you 100%. And that's not to say that other guys can't develop into it, right? But then you have to go back and you look at some of the other players that were mentioned in the chat or players that you brought up. They weren't those day one guys that came in and changed the landscape of the offense. You know what I mean? Will Fuller didn't come in and have a 1,000-yard receiving year as a true freshman. You know, it's those guys are the Ryan Williams of the world, right? That are going to Alabama and going to have a 1,000-yard receiving season as a true freshman. I guess as a 17-year-old, for those of you who didn't know, say that sarcastically. But, you know, I'm with you. I'm with you 100% on where that needs to be. So, Brian, I think that's going to do it for this part. Getting ready to dive into grades here. But before we move on to the next part here, guys, you know what to do. Hit that like button.
I did want to finish off this overview with the risers and guys who are a little bit down, and then we'll get into the grades after that.
Gotcha.
So I did want, because there are some guys, look, every year when you grade film, there's guys that are better than they were the year before. And not just better, like everybody, usually most guys just get better. It's guys that took big jumps. And so I want to go over a couple guys that I thought took some big jumps this season. And we'll start with offense. And for me, Will Black's a big one. Now, I know a lot of other people had Will Black taking a jump before, but as I said, during the summer, I didn't have any film of Will Black. All I had was highlights. And it's really hard to make a strong, convicted evaluation of a guy when all you really have is highlights as an offensive lineman. Well, in the past month or so, I've been able to get game film of Will Black, and he's a dude. So I had him as a 4-star top 250 guy based off highlights, and that's as much as I can give for an lineman in highlights. And when I got the senior film, he took a huge jump for me, and I now view him as a 5-star player. He graded it. So the way it works, I have it in 8 different spots where I give grades, and it's different for every player. It's specific to the position you play, and he jumped big. So he's a 5-star player. So he's clearly the biggest guy. But another guy, it's not quite a 4-star yet, but he went up. He went from a 3-star to a 3.5-star, which is like top 500 guy to a top 350 type of guy. And that's Jerome Bettis Jr. And I was, when I graded his senior film, I was very pleasantly surprised, Trev, to see what he can do. I mean, he got a lot bigger. You know, he's a really good sized kid. He's a legit 6'2". He's a legit 200 pounds. He's a pretty thickly built kid. He's really developed his body. He was a lot more smooth this year than he was in the past. Last year as a junior, in 14 games, he had 30 catches for 369 yards, 12.3 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns. This year as a senior, in 12 games, he had 36 catches for 630 yards, 17.5 yards per catch, and 7 touchdowns. And he's also a two-way player that had 47 tackles this year and 2 interceptions and a pass breakup and 2 forced fumbles. So he's a two-way player, and I love two-way players. You know that. And so before I said, look, I didn't hide the fact that he's not a Notre Dame caliber player. He's not. Watching his senior film, and I called a couple buddies of mine who are really good film evaluators and said, hey, give me your opinion of this kid. Didn't tell them what I thought. I said, just you watch the senior film. What do you think? And they were both said the same thing I did. Like, he got a lot better. Is he an impact guy? No, he's not. But I'll tell you this, after watching his senior film, Trev, and I'll break it down a little bit more in the receiver part, but he became a guy that I'm happy Notre Dame took now. Because I'm like, look, can he do what Jaden Thomas has done for Notre Dame after watching the senior film? Yeah. Before, he's going to be a great depth guy, maybe grows into an H-back. Maybe. Now you look at him and say, this guy can help you at some point down the road. And if he gets a little faster, even more so. So that's kind of where I saw. So when I watched that senior film, I was very encouraged by that. Those are the 2 guys on offense that I thought were the biggest risers of what they were before. That doesn't include Blake Hebert, doesn't include Nolan James, guys, Scrap Richardson, guys that they signed, because I only have the one grade of them, senior year film grade of them. This is guys that were previously committed. Defensively, a guy that I'm a lot higher on now than when he signed, this is the biggest riser for me defensively, is Dominic Hulak. I was not a fan of Dominic Hulak when they got him. I thought he was a nice, solid depth player, can play a lot of different positions, can help you out a little bit. Didn't love him, to be honest with you. Didn't understand why they passed on some other guys to take him. I still think there's some other guys they should have got, but I really liked his senior film, Trev. Put on some good weight, got more explosive, a little bit more twitchy off the edge, more comfortable playing off the edge because he played a lot of off-ball linebacker as a junior and sophomore. Plays running back at times for Immaculate Conception, which is the name of his high school. He was a guy that I had as a 3.5-star player, a top 350 to 400 kind of guy, solid, good depth player. He's now a 4-star top 250 guy on my board. And it's not just me, too. I know that at least one of the recruiting services also jumped him up to a 4-star top 250 guy. And I talked to some people in the Chicago area, and a lot of people were blown away with the jump he made. So it's not just me that felt that way. So he definitely impressed me a lot with his senior film, Trevor. He was a big riser for me. Another guy, and I already liked him more than anybody else anyway, like the national services, but another guy that had a really good senior year is Cree Thomas. He was really good. Now, I had him as a top, like 150, borderline top 250 guy when he committed to Notre Dame. After breaking down his senior film, he's a borderline top 100 guy. He's not quite there yet, but he's close. And he's now closer in points to 100 than he is to 150, to like the 250 range. You know what I mean? So he's still in that 150 range, but he went up as well. And so that was a really, really big jump for him. Loved, you just want to see that confirmation. And the other thing too is he played mostly safety as a junior. So it was a lot of projecting him to corner. He played a lot more corner as a senior. So you could see him flip his hips. You could see him, play. And he actually played a lot more at the line of scrimmage than Benjamin Morrison did. Not that he's better at it. It's just they allowed him to do it more where they didn't ask. Benjamin, they used their corners back then. I don't know if there's been a change in defensive coordinator, but they used him to play a lot of off man, and he was great at it. And he would play some press, but not as much. They did a little bit more with that with Cree. And he looked really good. He looked really smooth, could flip his hips because he's a little bit of a high-cut kid, real long legs. And those guys at times can be a little tight. And that's what we talked about with the Cam Hart. And that's what makes Cam Hart and Leonard more special is because they're those 6'2" kids that are a lot cleaner athletically, a lot smoother athletically than a lot of 6'2" athletes. Cree is over 6'1". He's about 6'1". Notre Dame listed him at 6 foot. I've seen him stand next to other guys they listed at 6 foot, and he's taller than they are. And they had him at 179. So my bet is that was his measurement when he was on campus 2 years ago and not an updated measurement because they had him, I think, about the same size as Mark Zachary. I've seen him and Mark Zachary next to each other. They're not the same height, nor are they the same size. But Cree had a really good senior year, so he went up on it for me, and which just makes what I already felt was the best cornerback class Notre Dame assigned since Lou Holtz was here. The only other class that could even come close to it was the Troy Pride, Dante Vaughn, and Julian Love class in 2016. And it got even better with how good Mark Zachary was and how good Cree Thomas was, and y'all know that I already loved Dallas Golden. So he was another big riser. And then Brandon Logan had a great senior year. I mean, Trev, I know you got a chance to see a little bit of him this year if you want to add to that, but he was just kind of a downhill thumper, just a really good athlete. He looked more like a football player this year. Just clean transitions, physical, explosive, and a big-time playmaker. If you want to add a little bit about what you saw from Brandon Logan, because I saw your face when I started talking about Brandon Logan, you want to add some thoughts into that. I thought he got a lot better as a senior.
Yeah, I have a couple friends that live up in Fort Wayne who, when Brandon Logan committed, they were familiar with the high school that he went to, and so that's kind of when he caught my eye, and I started looking at him a little bit. And during his junior year, you're right, he was very much just kind of a straight downhill guy, not as smooth of an athlete. And his senior year, he evolved into a really good football player and somebody that's really going to contribute in the defensive backfield. But you're right, I mean, he's one of those guys that just kind of has a nose for the football. You know what I mean? Like he's always in the right spot at the right time. He is developed a lot better in coverage. So I like the addition, man. I'm glad that you put him on your risers list because he was somebody that when I watched his junior year film, I was like, okay.
Right. You see some tools.
Yeah.
He was more of an athlete than a football player. Did you feel that way?
Yep.
I mean, he was just kind of a downhill, really fast. He looked like a really athletic baseball player trying to play football. You know what I mean? But you saw some tools. But yeah.
It was going to be one of those where if his senior year film reflected what his junior year was, it was like maybe that, staff sees a good foundation to build on, that they're going to evolve him into a football player. And it looks a lot like Brandon Logan kind of took a lot of that upon himself, and he developed into a really good football player his senior year. Yep, he did, which is really exciting.
So those are my biggest risers. I mean, there's a lot of other guys that improved as seniors, right? I mean, Anthony Sacca, solidified some things. He got better as a senior. Matty Augustine, even though he missed a little bit of time, he continues to get better. We didn't get a chance to see Gordy Solfstead. He was injured. So he did, Christopher Burgess got better. He went from a top 150 guy on my board to a top 100 guy, but it wasn't a huge jump. He was kind of right outside top 100 anyway. He just had more of a natural junior to senior year growth. He even played some middle linebacker for them. That I would not have wanted to be on the other side of the field when watching Chris freaking Burgess standing at middle linebacker on the other side of the field.
Yeah,
that would have not been fun. Owen Streebig made, just normal. And if you guys like watching a offensive line film, his high school puts out almost all their games online. You can actually watch his games, which are always way better for evaluating offensive linemen. So if you go online and I think it was a Waukesha, right?
Yeah,
Waukesha Memorial.
Yeah,
I think we said like Waukesha or something like that. And somebody was like, you got that wrong. It's Waukesha. I was like, okay, my bad. But like other guys, like Elijah Burris got better as a senior, but not like I already liked him more than most anyway. You know what I mean? Like, so he was already there. But most of those guys were just normal junior to senior improvement. And I only really had three guys that I don't want to call them that they were descenders, but they didn't have the jumps that I hoped that they would have as seniors. Trev, and there's three guys in that category. Actually, the only guy on offense that I was really disappointed in a senior film, and I hate saying this because he's not in the class anymore, and I feel kind of bad. Like I love the kid, great family. Justin Thurman just never took that jump as a player. He's a really explosive athlete, but he just never took that jump as a player, and just didn't become like that Notre Dame caliber back that I thought he could become.
Sure.
And so he was a guy that you understood what. Now, just so people understand, Notre Dame did not drop him. They did drop Daniel Anderson. Notre Dame's told Justin Thurman, if you want to stay in the class, you can. But they had the same evaluation I did. He just didn't improve. And they said it's going to have a tough time playing here. And because they loved the kid and respected, they had the room for him. They said, we're going to honor your commitment. But we're just letting you know we do love you. And you may want to think about going somewhere else where you're going to have a better shot to play. And he ended up going to Kansas. So I was really happy with him. Somebody just said Daniel Anderson signed with Northwestern. I love that for that kid. Love that kid. He's one of the best young men you're ever going to meet in the recruiting process. And actually, I got to know him and his family a little bit better after he decommitted because of some of the comments. But you talk to Ryan, talk maybe the cover of the kid's commitment. It's a first-class young man, just a first-class young man. But him and Justin Thurman are now at schools that are better fits for them, where they can actually have a shot to play. And so that's a position where I thought Notre Dame upgraded bigly, in my opinion. You like that bigly.
I do.
But there were three players that I thought had, I don't say not disappointing senior seasons, but just didn't make the jumps that I thought they would, and their grade went down a little bit. Davion Dixon is one. I thought as he got bigger and bigger and bigger, he got a little bit more stiff. He's a big, strong kid. He's got a really nice first step, but his lateral movement just kind of regressed a little bit. He's still a quality player. I mean, it's still a good pickup. He's still a guy you put in there that knows that one technique or play that zero technique. Or if you want to go odd, he's a guy that if you want to mix up some odd fronts and maybe drop your Viper, he's a guy that can line up over the center and play, that zero technique. He didn't have the athletic improvements that I thought he would have. And actually, I think he's a little less athletic now than he was as a sophomore when he committed. Still a good football player. Still glad they got him. But he just didn't have the rise that I thought he was going to have. His grade actually went down a little bit on my board. Joseph Reef's another one. Just evaluating his frame this summer. He doesn't have the frame I hoped he would have or thought he had watching film. I don't know that he's got the frame to grow into a 3 technique now, which makes him more of a pure edge player. Still a good player, high motor, solid athlete. You know, seeing him this summer, watching his senior film, his grade went down a little bit for me. He's no longer a top 250 guy. He's a little bit outside of that now. Still happy with the pickup, still a good player, but his ceiling is really what kind of came down a little bit for me in my evaluation of him. Still like the floor, still like a lot of the tools. Very productive high school player. Very productive high school player. Just the projection's not quite as clean as I had hoped it would be and thought it would be initially. And then another guy, he's still a heck of a football player, and he still grades out as a 4-star player. But for me, I was hoping that Ethan Long would get a little bit more burst as a senior, from a speed standpoint, and he didn't really take that jump. Really good instincts, tough kid, smooth kid, but just still doesn't have that top-level speed that you want from like that high-level safety type of player. I'm still hoping that comes at some point in time at Notre Dame. And I still like him. He still can play at Notre Dame. He can be a rotation guy at Notre Dame, a starter down the road at Notre Dame. Still love all that. I just was hoping that he'd take a little bit more of a jump as a senior, get a little bit more explosive as a senior, and he just didn't do that. So those are the 3 guys whose grades are either stayed put or went down a little bit after senior film, and you compare that to the risers. So that's my risers and kind of fallers a little bit because you're always if you go through a class and you don't have anybody that just didn't quite have the senior you hoped for, either A, you've got the Irish colored glasses on or whatever color your school plays for, or B, the recruiting staff was perfect, and nobody is. Every class is going to have those, and so again, none of those guys that are still in the class are like, man, they shouldn't offer that kid. None of those are like that. Those guys are no longer in the class anymore. They just didn't quite have the jump that I hoped that they would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to bounce it back to you, I do have a quick question before we move on to the next segment. So out of all the 25 signees that they had, is there a guy on here that from their junior year to senior year that you think, flew under the radar? I know you talked about your biggest risers, but maybe it could be out of those or somebody else. But is there anybody that you thought might not have gotten the recognition that they deserve nationally that are now just playing at a much higher level than what you anticipated after their senior year?
That maybe the national people are starting to recognize? Yeah. I mean, some of those guys that I talked about are actually starting to get a little bit more recognition nationally. Not all of them, because I think what happens with some of these recruiting services, Trevor, is they get an opinion on a guy that commits early and then they just don't reevaluate him. And it's unfortunate, but they just don't reevaluate those players. So I don't think Rivals and some of those other recruiting services did any kind of reevaluation of Elijah Burris. I don't think they did that at all. I think some of these recruiting services that still have Dom Hulak as a 3-star player, I just don't think they reevaluated him. I think they just had their evaluation and there was no need to change it. Some did. And so like Elijah Burris, for example, was a consensus 3-star recruit, very low 3-star recruit, by the way, when he committed to Notre Dame. And for example, he was a 247, had him as and they're the worst rankings of them all, but I got to give credit where credit is due. He was a number 411 player in the country coming into the fall, and they jumped him up all the way to in the top 240. So obviously that's not too far behind where I have him. You look at a guy like Dom Hulak, who was a consensus 3-star recruit. He's now a 4-star on Rivals, which is a jump. And now on 3 now has him as the number 279 player in the country. I don't know if they'll drop him or not out, but they started to kind of show a little bit of recognition for what he can do. Some of the other guys still, not getting the love. I mean, Cree Thomas still isn't getting the respect that he deserves. And then a couple others obviously started already getting that push. I mean, Will Black, I was actually the last person to give Will Black that jump just because I didn't have any good film of him. Sure. And so, and I'm not making an evaluation off of an offensive lineman based on what he did in a non-padded camp. I needed to see film.
Right.
But he obviously is there. And so those are the guys that are starting to get a little bit more national attention. Some of the Notre Dame guys, like Rivals, dropped Jadon Blair out of their the top 300. I told a guy there, I was like, dude, you guys are gonna regret that big time, gonna regret that. But no, nobody else is getting really that was flying under the radar before is getting that outside of the guys that I just talked about. It's a good question.
Gotcha. Well, sounds good, man. Well, now I think it is time to move on to the next section where we talk through and we grade each individual position in the 2025 signee class. But before we do that, you guys know the drill. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you know when Irish Breakdown goes live so you can stay in the now. And be sure to share this podcast with friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame as much as you do. And of course, be sure to go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where we have all of our exclusive content coming out. That's where you can stay the most up to date with everything happening Notre Dame. So make sure you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Brian, we've kind of given our overview of everything that's gone on with the class, initial thoughts overall, what it means for the team moving forward. Now let's kind of break down what you think of everybody individually.
Yeah, and we'll kind of go through what we'll do is we'll go through offense first and then defense. I'll give an overall grade of the class as a whole, then the offensive grade, then I'll go position by position and give grades of the position group. And then within that, I'll kind of talk about each player. So I'm going to give you guys a lot of stuff here. So I'm going to just spew a lot out. Trev, you know me, I'm going to get on a roll. So if you want to interject, just cut me off. Right. And or just give me some signal and let me know if you want to add anything. Cause you know me, once I get rolling on recruiting, I just get rolling. You know what I mean?
You got it.
But overall class, somebody asked in the chat, and I'll say it here is how do you evaluate this class? And to me, I grade this class overall as a top 8 to 10 type of class. It may be 6, it may be 12. It's like with anything else, you know, sometimes the number 10 class in the country is a legit number 10 class. Sometimes a number 10 class a year before would have been 6th. Sometimes a number 10 class the next year is going to be 13th. It just depends on the quality of the overall. It's like every year, the number 10 team in the country at the end of the year is not always the same exact type of team. Some years the number 10 team's really good, just a great year, a lot of good teams. Sometimes the number 10 team's a team that's not that good, but there weren't a lot of good teams, right? So it's in that 8 to 10 range. A lot of impact talent, a lot of meeting numbers, meeting needs, a lot of depth, 25-man class. You literally hit impact players on offense, special teams, and offense, defense, and special teams, right? So it's an 8 to 10 caliber class. It needed a little bit more. It needed a more high-level quarterback, more impact talent at receiver, and more impact talent in the D-line to jump up higher, in my opinion. At a lot of positions, this is an elite top 5 class. Offensive line, tight end, linebacker, secondary, place kicker. But D-line, quarterback, and receiver are very important positions. And when you're not quite at that level at those positions, it's going to drag you down a little bit. And when I mean drag you down, it drags you down from 5 to like 8 to 10 range, right? It doesn't drag you down to like 19. And that's how I see that class. And I think this class is going to be very undervalued because of the fact that there's not enough people that have graded Nolan James properly. Although one of the recruiting services, I believe 247, recently jumped him also into their top 247 in their top ranking and made him a 4-star. But they're the only ones that did. They have him now number 223. So props to them for grading him correctly. When he committed to Notre Dame, they had him as the number 471 player in the country. And he jumped all the way up to 223, which is within range of, I have him a little bit higher, but it's within range. So, you know, props to them. I give them a hard time, you know, and just, but they got a couple of these right. But I look at just, you know, I think guys like, I think Elijah Burris is being undervalued. I've said that from the beginning. I think that a guy like Christopher Burgess is kind of right there by most. Some have him too low. I think a guy like Dom Hulak is being undervalued. I think Jadon Blair is way undervalued by everybody other than On3. They have him as the number 54 player in the country. 247 has it 157. That's way too low. ESPN has him at 219, way too low, and Rivals dropped him out of their top 300 completely, which is just, or their top 250 completely, which is ridiculous. So if he was great, if he was evaluated properly, and if Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary were evaluated properly, then I think this class would be graded much differently. And I've been saying this for a while. You know, people say, well, you know, Ohio State's got a much better DB class. No, they don't. Just because those guys are graded higher doesn't mean they're better. And then Ohio State just lost Naheem Offord today, by the way, their 5-star corner, who was pretty good. But I look at Mark Zachary, and Rivals dropped him out of their top 250. He's 220 on ESPN, 175 on 247, 111 on On3. On3 is much closer for him. Rivals has Dallas Golden at number 66, which is fine. It's a little low, but it's in that range. But he's 132 on On3, 247 has him at 163, and ESPN has a 149. Those guys are both surefire, easy top 100 players. So, like, when we look at a secondary class, we say, well, this is an elite secondary class. Nationally, they don't view it that way because they have Jadon Blair too low. They have Mark Zachary too low. And they have Rivals has Dallas Golden at 66, which is fine. I'd have him a little higher, but 66 is fine. If I have you as a top 50 player and somebody puts him in the number 66, I'm like, oh my God, you missed him so bad. He's top 50. That's within range. It's fine. But then they have Mark Zachary and Jadon Blair outside of their top 250. So they're going to miss on the class. They have Cree Thomas as an unranked 4-star. They have Ethan Long. I think they dropped him down to a 3-star, I believe. So they're missing the boat on how good the secondary class is. And so that's my issue is and we've had this conversation before. We tried to tell everybody last year that Leonard Moore was a dude. We tried to tell people about Benjamin Morrison the year before. The national recruiting services have yet to come around on the fact that nobody evaluates defensive back talent right now better than Mike Mickens does. And it's kind of like it used to be when the D lineman would commit to Bama or, O lineman commits to Notre Dame. All of a sudden their ranking gets a bump because they just get the benefit of the doubt. Mike Mickens needs to be there because you talk to Notre Dame people, and of course we do. And I know when Ryan and I were still doing recruiting shows and stuff and still breaking stuff down when these kids committed, we had them both as top 50 players, and they still are.
Yeah.
So it's an elite secondary class, but it's not going to be viewed that way, which is why the class is lower than it should be. And so that's why you see rankings of them outside the top 10. That's fine. You can focus on that. That's all good. But it's going to be another class like we've seen in the past that is going to end up being a lot better in college than they were when they signed. And I'm excited about that. Because unlike past years, they took some guys early that weren't that good. They kind of processed those guys out this year. Now, I don't love that. I'm not a big fan of that. But a lot of those guys that were going to drag the class down kind of got processed out a little bit, and it raised the level of the class quite a bit, in my opinion. And again, I view it as in the top 8 to 10 class. There's room for improvement. It could have been better, and it should have been better. I mean, if and I'll say it again, I'll save it for the position groups, but there's a couple spots where if they would have taken guys that we think they could have got, we're having a very different conversation right now. So overall class, Trev, I give it, and that's looking at my grade, that's an A- class. Overall, because the way I do grades, it's A is elite to college football playoff caliber. B is outstanding top 15 caliber. When I think college football playoff, I don't think you're making it at 12. It's more of you're a quarterfinals, semifinals, that type of class, right? And B is outstanding top 15 caliber class. C is a solid borderline top 25 caliber group. It can either be class or group. D is subpar, just substandard of what it should be. Then F is a disaster, and I've literally not given Notre Dame an F in a very long time because, those years when they didn't sign a guy at a position, they needed a position, you're going to kind of get an F there. When Jonathan McAllister's your best defensive end target, you're going to get a pretty low grade there. So that's kind of where they're at with that. So overall, I give this class an A-. It's not quite that elite top 5 to 7 type of group, but in that 8 to 10, that's an A-, B+ range. It's a very good class. Can get better, but it's a very good class. So that's the overall view of the class.
Okay. No, I like that. So, and then just to recap, to make sure that I'm on the same page as you, for it to make that jump higher than that 8 to 10 range, probably a little bit better efforts in quarterback recruiting, wide receiver recruiting, D-line recruiting, or maybe not better efforts. Maybe that's not the best word.
Results. Better results. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Receivers one, defensive tackle specifically is another one.
Okay.
And, and quarterback was good. I mean, quarterback's good, but I like Blake Hebert. I'll break him down in a minute, but he's not a top, I have him graded out as a top 250 guy, not a top 100 guy. I had Kenny Minchie's a top 100 guy. CJ Carr is a 5-star.
Right.
he's a good football player with a very high ceiling, but he needs a lot more development than those other guys did. And so I like the pickup, but it's not a pickup where I say they're a top 5 class because of him.
Right.
He's more of that guy that ends up being better in college potentially than he was as a prospect. And there's guys like that, just we've talked about them in the past. We're like Boubacar was that way. We graded Boubacar pretty low from a ranking standpoint coming out of high school because he was super raw. He had been banged up a lot, but we said, boy, the upside is elite. Well, that means he's got a chance to be a better college player than maybe he was a high school player. Whereas a guy like Gerby Lambert, guys like, Charles Jagasol, guys like CJ Carr, like they're 5 stars coming out and they've got 5-star upside, or top 50 guys coming out with 5-star upside. Kingston was that way. Drake was that way. Jaden Osbury was that way. And you're seeing them some of those guys already panning out to be that good.
Right.
Leonard Moore was a guy that had 4.5-star upside grade. That's of a top 50 player. And so that's kind of where that's at. But overall, Trev, A- B+, do better at quarterback, as you mentioned, do better at wide receiver, do better, especially with D tackles. But, one more really twitchy edge rusher would have been things that would have vaulted this up into the top 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive in then. Let's dive into the individual position groups. And we had already mentioned Blake Hebert, which makes a pretty good transition, man. So let's dive into Blake Hebert as a player, how he did in high school, just his impact on this class and everything. So, Brian, take it away with the lone quarterback in this class.
So we'll go positions I have at Trev, and at the end I'll give the offensive grade at the end. So quarterback, I give it a B-. Right now, that means, as I said, B is outstanding to top 15 caliber, and then obviously the closer you get to being an A, the closer you get to being a C, will determine the B-, the plus, right? So I give it a B-. And I give it a B- because I have Blake Hebert as a top 250 guy, 4-star top 250 player. Like the tools. He's a big-armed kid, great frame. He's like 6'3", 215. Maybe he's 6'2", 6'2 and a half. That's fine. But he's thick-built kid. You see the well-built lower body. He's got a pretty good sized upper body. He's a well-put-together kid. He's going to be 220 plus at some point in time. He's a quality athlete. He's a guy that you can legitimately call run plays for. You're not going to build your run game around him like you do Riley Leonard, but some of the short yardage stuff that Notre Dame does with Riley Leonard, he can do. He can pull a backside read zone and take off and run and pick up 15, 20 yards. And if you give him a crease or you make a mistake, he can take it to the house. Like I said, not a guy that you're going to necessarily be doing as much as Riley Leonard, but you're going to be having him. He can do stuff that you're not going to be asking CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey to do as runners. They're more athletes that can scramble. They're not guys you're building your run game around. Like CJ Carr is a very good athlete. Kenny Minchey's a very good athlete. But they're not runners. They're pocket passers that can run, that can scramble and move around. This is a kid you can do some designed run game stuff. And in that regard, I actually kind of like the compliment to CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey. In that regard, he's a little different than they are. Like I said, big arm, playmaker in high school. He's just raw. And the B- grade comes from the fact that he is raw. His ball placement needs a lot of work because his footwork needs a lot of work. He's got a really nice, clean, compact, fast release that's not always consistent. At times, he'll kind of rush his delivery a little bit. He also does a lot where, and Trev, as a quarterback, you know exactly what this is going to cause. A lot of times when he throws, he steps on and locks his front foot or his front leg. And once you lock that front leg, you have now basically put a resistance into your hips, and it's going to slow down your whole throwing motion. A lot of times you want to get there and you drive off that back foot. If you're driving off your back foot, you can't lock your front foot, but he'll plant that lead foot and lock it, and then it just throws his whole motion off. And you'll see some throws, Trev, on film where he'll bang a 20-yard in cut, and you're like, wow. And then there's other times he'll throw a 15-yard in cut, and it just dies at the end. You're like, how do those two things happen? So you go back and you watch the film, and you see that he'll do that. Sometimes he'll like speed up the arm motion, and so he'll just kind of rush it, almost shot put it, and doesn't get that same torque into the throw. But a lot of times he's got a really nice base in the pocket, but he doesn't transition well from back to front. He actually goes right to the front. That front leg hits, it locks, and it just takes all so like throwing it's like a baseball. It's like you get that torque. It's a very natural torque that comes from your hips up to your upper body, and that's how you get that snap on the ball. Even guys who are great at not setting their feet and throwing still have that upper body torque. They don't just go like this and don't move their body. They have that torque. Well, when you lock your front foot, it kind of drives into your hips and it stops your hips. And so it stops that torquing motion, and it kind of makes you almost shot put because you can't drive on it. He'll do that, and you'll see the ball just kind of go down. Once that gets cleaned up, and that's a relatively easy freshman year type of fix, and he starts kind of having a little bit more bend in his knees and starts driving off of that back for a little bit, you're going to see him be way more consistent just driving the football. And it also, more than anything, it kills his ball placement. Because if you're trying to lead a guy this way, you lock that front foot, you can't bring the rest of your body with you. And so you're going to end up releasing the ball back here instead of here, and that kills your ball placement. So those are things that you see from him. And like, he throws a great deep ball, but at times he'll dip that back shoulder a little bit too much and the ball just hang up a little bit. You know, you're going to have a little bit of a dip, but don't dip quite as much. Again, very easy freshman year fix. Those things all got to get fixed though. Footwork's got to get fixed. He's a pretty smart kid. You can see him processing reads pretty well. But the mechanical things that lead to him making just making him less accurate than you want him to be is what drags his grade down. And then he also, like a lot of young quarterbacks, he's a smart kid, but at times he will lock into a read. And like, there was one play he had in high school where he literally catches the ball, looks that way, just turns and throws blindly a now screen, and the DB read it perfectly, steps in front of it, takes it back for a touchdown. Like, you got to have some awareness of what's being done. Part of that was a great read by the guy. There's just some things like that, and that'll cause some turnovers that you don't want. So those are things that you got to work through, but the tools are really impressive. And so he grades out as a 4-star player, top 250 caliber kid with a 4.5-star upside grade. And just a reminder what that is. 5 stars, top 25 on my system. 4.5 stars, sort of that top 50 to 75 range. And then 4-star is more of that top 100 to 250 range. And then 3.5 stars, like top 350 to 400, and 3 stars, like a top 500 to lower kind of guy. And so I give 2 grades for those who are kind of new to what we do here. I give a grade of where they are right now. Just, this is your grade for right now. And then there's the upside grade that is, this is what your ceiling can be if you fill out, if you improve mechanically, whatever the case may be, get more experience. Every kid has a different thing holding him back from his upside. Some kids are 4 stars now with 4-star upside grade. Notre Dame doesn't recruit many kids like that. And so he is a top 250 guy that has 4.5-star upside, which means if the light goes on for Blake Hebert, he's got a chance to be really good. And so he's a B-, which is, again, that top 15-ish caliber player.
He has a good foundation for Mike Denbrock and Gino Guidugli to work with. I mean, the thing that jumps off the page for me is his arm strength. And I know that you touched on it, but I remember when he committed and we did a commitment video for him, we did a show after his commitment to Notre Dame when he flipped from Clemson, and man, his arm strength is there. His arm strength is there. And if he can fix his front leg problem, because that's affecting his release point, that's why he'll sail some, that's why he'll drive some into the ground. But if that can get fixed and he starts to fix some of those mechanical errors, I think that he's going to add some good depth to the room. Him as a runner, I've seen a lot of people talk about how he's like just a straight up dual threat guy. I mean, he doesn't have like the same running ability as a Riley Leonard, but I could see him being used very similar to how, Kansas State used Will Howard, like a lot of stuff in the red zone and pulling a backside zone, not necessarily designing quarterback draws for him like what Denbrock is doing right now with Riley Leonard. But no, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what Blake Hebert can do. Excited to see what he can do, man. So let's move down to the running back, and we got Nolan James to talk about here, Brian. So thoughts on him and what he's going to do for this class and what he's going to do at Notre Dame.
Dude, I love Nolan James. Like, this is one of the things that's not getting talked enough about because of recruiting rankings. And he's a guy that I mean, you look at this kid, Trev, and you look at he reminds me a lot of what Audric Estime did as a senior. Like, I liked Audric as a junior, but he was a solid prospect. And Notre Dame thought he was just a solid prospect. That's why they didn't offer him and push for him, and why he committed to Michigan State. And he comes out of senior year, and he was a monster. He averaged like 8-9 yards a carry. He rushed for, I think, I have to find what his numbers were, but Audric had like just some crazy numbers, Trevor, where let me find this one. He ended up rushing as a junior. He rushed for 1,190 yards, 6.9 yards per carry, and 15 touchdowns in 5 games. As a senior in 8 games, because that was a COVID year, he rushed for 1,857 yards, 9.8 yards per carry, and 22 touchdowns. And if you know anything about the New Jersey football he plays in, that's really good football he's playing against. And he just went from like good player to monster. Now, Nolan's not quite what Audric was, but he had a similar jump this year at DePaul Catholic. Trevor, and just had an outstanding senior season. So in 2023, as a junior, he had 221 attempts for 1,422 yards, 6.4 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns, 23 catches for 193 yards and a touchdown. It's a pretty darn good season, especially when you know the level of competition. He plays against Bosco and Paramus Catholic and Seton Hall and St. Peter's Prep, where the Adamiolas were from, Brandon Wimbush was from. He plays really good football. And you look at his senior year production, Trevor, 243 attempts, 1,921 yards, jumped up to 7.9 yards per carry, 19 touchdowns, and had 27 catches for 340 yards and 4 touchdowns. Outstanding football player. And we talked about this when he committed. He's a really weirdly built kid, and I don't mean this as an insult, but he's got a much lower body than a lot of kids do. So like very short legs, which makes him a little harder to get on. That's why he's kind of really tough to bring down, but he's got all the running back tools you want, right? Like it's great to have foot quickness, which he has. He's a very sudden kid. He's very twitchy. He can be smooth when he needs to, but he's got a lot of suddenness to his game. He's got good open field speed. He can make big plays. There's no doubt about that. He's got a lot of, strength. He doesn't look that big, but he's really put together well. Notre Dame had him listed at 5'9", 200. It's about right. He reminds me a lot of Jadarian from a build standpoint, Trevor. But when you watch the running back traits, that's what separates him. And that's where I can understand why people are not as much in love with him. I understand it, because he doesn't have the elite size, the elite 40, the elite, physical traits. He's got pretty good physical traits. He's got exceptional vision, which is a running back trait. His second level anticipation, which is the ability to kind of read what's happening and anticipate what's going to happen and make the proper cut, is exceptional. His ability to redirect and like, guys can be quick, but like you watch a lot of guys leap players. We see that a lot now. I rarely see a guy that can do what Jeremiah Love does, which is leap that high and then hit the ground in running form and just go. That's a level of balance and agility that you just don't see a lot. And Nolan, I haven't seen him do the leaping thing, but his ability to jump cut and just plant and go is really good. His feel for the game is really good. As a sophomore, they actually used him a lot he was a running back and a slot receiver. So as a sophomore, he rushed 91 times for 625 yards and 8 touchdowns. He also caught 43 passes for 530 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he has that pass game background where he could come into Notre Dame and do what Aeneas Williams is doing, but he could also do what Jadarian Price is doing with not quite as much juice, right? Like, I'm not going to say he's going to average 7.3 yards per carry like Jadarian did, but similar type of running style to Jadarian. But that's why Jadarian was a top 100 guy on my board, and this kid's a top 150 guy on my board, because Jadarian had a little bit more juice. And that's the difference, where Jadarian may take one for 70, Nolan takes it for 40. But he makes the same kind of reads. He's got that same kind of, like, you'll see, you look at Jadarian and he doesn't look elusive, but he is, and he's just got that, like, wow, I didn't notice how much of a cut that was. He's really hard to get a shot on. Nolan is very similar to Jadarian that way. Also low built guy. He just doesn't have what separates him from being a top 150 guy that I have him to a top 100 guy is just that elite explosiveness that Jadarian had, that Jeremiah Love had. Nolan doesn't have that, but he's a really good football player and can do a lot of different things. And he can fit any role you need him to play. Third down back, every down back, short yardage back. He can do it all. He's a very underrated football player. And going from Justin Thurman and Daniel Anderson to him was a big jump for the Notre Dame staff. Big jump.
The way that he's built and put together and how he runs, he does a really good job of getting his shoulder square when he runs. He does a really good job of that. And maybe it's just his build with him being, that 5'9", 200-pound guy. He reminds me a lot of that Kyron Williams, Blake Corum type of build, like low center of gravity. They're a guy that can they can break it open, but they're not Jeremiah Love. They're not going to beat somebody in a foot race or beat an angle. But Nolan James, he reminds me a lot of that style of running back. And if my memory serves me correctly, Blake Corum and Kyron Williams did okay in college.
And I would argue he's more explosive than those two from a speed standpoint.
Yep.
But the build is similar to those guys, and the ability to just be sudden with your cuts, like you were talking about, Kyron is a very good comp. So I think Blake Corum's an even better comp because Kyron wasn't quite as powerful as Blake was. And I think Nolan is more powerful than Kyron was. So I think the Blake Corum comparison is a really good one. Trevor, I like that one as a comp. It's a really good comp.
Thanks. Well,
I wasn't saying that like I'm surprised. I just, it's a good job. It's a good job.
No, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you. So moving along here, talking more offensive position groups. And I know this one's a little bit of a hot topic of discussion for some people, but let's dive into the wide receiver room and the recruits and the commits that they got signed today in the 2025 class, Brian.
So I gave the running back grade a B. I forgot to say that. Quarterback a B minus. Running back receiver room, I give a C+. Now, C+ for me is a solid group because my grade C, it's solid, borderline top 25. I have it a B as a C+. So it's not a top 15 group because for a couple reasons. One, you did want 4. 3 is the number you needed. You needed 3, but you wanted 4. You worked hard to get 4 and you didn't get 4. That's going to bring it down a little bit as well. And as I said earlier, the one big thing about the class, and I'll get into each player individually, but as a whole, there's just no guy that right now that's a number 1. Now, maybe Antavius Richardson becomes that kind of guy. Maybe Elijah Burris becomes that kind of guy. Maybe Jerome Bettis surprises all and he becomes that kind of guy. But right now, none of those guys are that, either by being elite athletes or by being, 6'3", 215 and running a 4.5. They're just not that. There's no Kevin Austin in this class as a prospect. It also goes to show that not every guy that's way necessarily becomes that kind of dude. But we saw what Kevin Austin could do in his last year when he finally started to kind of figure it out a little bit and stayed eligible and all that kind of stuff. He was a pretty good football player. It's lacking that. And for me to have you as a top 10 or top 15 receiving core, you got to have at least one guy that you look at and say, I think he's a number 1. Now, I think they have a couple guys that could be number 1s, but right now there's a bit of a ways between where they are now and where they would need to be number 1s for different reasons. And so that's where we'll kind of get into the individual players. My highest graded receiver now on the current grade is Elijah Burris, who's a guy that, as you all know, I was very high on Elijah when they signed him, when they got a commitment from him. I thought Elijah was a guy that just has all the tools to be a really good college receiver. Yes, he lacks high-level speed, which is part of the reason he doesn't get a top 100 grade. I love his foot quickness. He's got great balance. He's got great route running instincts. He's a guy that's got excellent ball skills, very fluid hips. He can make the really tough back shoulder throws. He's got to get a lot stronger. He's a pretty skinny kid right now. He's got to get a lot stronger. And I hope that in college he has a little bit gets a little bit more burst. So I grade right now Elijah as a top 150 caliber prospect. He probably leans more to 175 and 200 than he does leaning towards the top 100. So if I miss, or he's going to be more 175 to 200 is where I have him now. I do have him as a 4.5-star upside grade because I think he's a guy that has the ability to go out and play that Z position and be that dynamic route runner that's just getting open on curls, getting open on comebacks, screwing you into the ground with a corner post route or a post corner route, or, just you think he's running a vertical and just snaps that dig off underneath and he gets that separation that way. And he's got excellent ball skills. He can catch the ball in traffic. He saw a huge jump in production this year, Trevor, and that was one of the things that was missing as well. He missed a sophomore year with an injury. Came back last year. They had a really good wide receiver committed or on this team who's, I think, also a Power 5 commitment. I forget who he's committed to, but he kind of was their number one guy. He was the number one guy the year before. Well, this year, Elijah started to become a little bit more of that, hey, get me the ball. You need to get me the ball type of guy. And he didn't really jump his catches a whole lot. He had 29 last year, but he went up to 37 this year. But his yardage went from 439 and 5 touchdowns to 962 and 15 touchdowns. And when you consider the fact he's got a Division I Power 5 receiver on the other side and a running back, because he's a high school teammate of Nolan James, who rushed for 1,900 yards, that's pretty good. And one thing I like about both Elijah Burris and Nolan James, Trev, is they were big game players. So you look at Elijah Burris this year, he goes for over 100 yards on Paramus Catholic. He goes for 2 catches and 97 yards and a touchdown against Good Counsel, who's one of the top programs in the state of Maryland, and a lot of times is ranked in the top 25. He had 4 catches for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns against Don Bosco Prep. And in the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, he went 2 for 84 and a touchdown, 3 for 90 and 5 for 87 and 2 touchdowns. And the reason he didn't do a whole lot in the state title game, 1 catch for 15 yards and went for a touchdown, is because there's this kid that they had on their team named Nolan James, who in the state title game carried the ball 29 times for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nolan, here's a great stat for you, and I should have given you this in the last one. Nolan James in the playoffs this year, 4-game playoff, rushed for 653 yards, 8.1 per carry, and had 5 touchdowns in the playoffs. He went for at least 100 yards in every playoff game. The only one, his lowest output was 103. He had 2 touchdowns on 12 carries because they blew a team out 45-14. But Elijah Burris is similar. When they, in the big games against Don Bosco, which is their big rival, and in Paramus Catholic, in the playoffs, these guys made plays, and that's something you look at when you're evaluating players and their intangibles. Okay, you put up good numbers, but in the 2 biggest games of the year, you did nothing. You got shut out. These kids aren't that way. And that's something I praised Jeremiah Love for when they signed him, because his best game of his career was the state title game. He went for 300 yards. You're like, that's a money player. Look at Jeremiah Love, had almost 1,000 yards in the playoffs in his senior year. That's what you want. And then guess what? Look what he's done in college. Big games, Jeremiah steps up, and he doesn't play that great against Florida State, but you go play Army the next week, 2 weeks later, go play USC on the road, and he's balling. And that's kind of how he is. And these 2 kids have a little bit of that as well.
It's kind of that unsung trait that you look for. Like, Marcus Freeman, you've brought up before, Brian, that Marcus Freeman is now recruiting guys that kind of have that intangible piece. Now, obviously, it's something that could be tracked on the stat sheet, right? We just rattled off what Nolan James did, what Jeremiah Love did, what Burris did in, playoffs, high school, postseason. But, for me, it's about getting to like situational football and what you're going to do when the lights are the brightest. And I think that is an unsung piece where, in years past under a different regime, you might not have gotten that many guys. And the guys that you did get that were like that were the big time gamers. You know what I mean? So I think that's a huge, huge unsung trait. And I'm happy that that's what the staff has been looking for.
They also signed Scrap Richardson, who is a very intriguing guy. He is the polar opposite of Elijah Burris. He's a kid that has probably a higher ceiling. He's taller. He's faster. He's ran a 10.68. He's got timed as a 10.68 in the 100-meter dash, which is pretty good for a high school kid who's not a track guy. He just runs track. Doesn't make him a track guy. Dynamic athlete, really explosive with the ball in his hands. And Elijah brings some of that to the table as well. He's not just a catch the ball and get tackled guy. He's got some after the catch ability as well. But this is the kind of kid you say, let's get the tunnel screen thrown to this kid. Let's throw the go ball to this kid. Let's get down the field to this kid. He brings that kind of athleticism, but you don't know what kind of receiver he's going to be because he plays quarterback and defensive back in high school. But that's also one of the things I love about him, because I was talking to somebody today. It's like, look, I mean, I've taken kids at the level I coached at as freshman quarterbacks, and I had a kid named Michael O'Brien at Christopher Newport that was a high school quarterback. He came in, got in my rotation, caught like 10 plus balls as a freshman. And if you can coach the position, you can get a kid, an athlete like that ready to go. Well, maybe not the first year, but definitely by year 2. But if you're a good enough coach and you have the need, you can get him ready by his first year if the kid has the proper work ethic. And so we're going to find out if this young man's willing to put in the work. That's certainly a question mark, but there's a lot of tools there to work with. And that's the thing is I always had this philosophy as a receivers coach, Trev, is I want athleticism. Give me the tools. Like if you've got the tools, if you're a kid that can run, if you've got the hips, if you've got the feet, if you've got, great body control, if you got length, I can teach you how to play wide receiver, right? If you've got those tools. And you have to have some level of catching the ball. I don't know that Scrap how he's going to be with ball skills, but in my experience, quarterbacks tend to have really good ball skills and really good hands. I made the transition at this lower level from a quarterback my whole life to receiver. And I think in my 3rd high school game playing receiver, I set the school's touchdown record with 5. You know what I mean? So like if you're an athlete and you can learn the position if you can catch, and most quarterbacks can catch. They have good hands. We got to see it, right? We got to see how he tracks the ball. We don't know how he's going to track the ball down the field. We don't know how he's going to, handle back shoulders. We don't know how he's going to be in traffic going over the middle. There's a lot of those things we don't know, which is why his grade is not as high. Like I have him as a top 250 guy. And actually, let me check my grade. I think that's what I have him as. Let me see what my grade is for him. I have him as top 250 player. So 4-star, top 250. So below Elijah, but that's all based off his athletic tools. His entire grade is based off his athletic ability and what he does with the ball in his hands, which is really good. What we don't know about him is, does he have the receiver traits? Like with Elijah, good athlete, not elite athlete, but he's got all the receiver traits you want. Great ball skills, route running, feel for the game, all that. With Antavius, he's 6'2", he's got a really outstanding athletic skills. He's long, he's fast, he's elusive, and we know what he can do with the ball in his hands. And we also know he's tough. And we see that as a runner, but you also see that on defense. This is a kid who could legitimately play in the secondary for Notre Dame if you needed him to. Like, he's that good of a defensive back. But you need him at receiver. But it's like, okay, but I don't know what receiver traits he has. Tracking the ball, route fielding, feel for getting open as a route runner. Usually quarterbacks tend to end up being pretty good at that, Trevor, because they understand, I know what I would want you to do when I'm scrambling or when I'm working open, but there's just a lot of those things we don't know, and that's why the grade is a little bit lower. But he does have another guy that's got a 4.5-star upside grade. And he's also a guy that is also someone else who is getting a little bit of a love for his senior year production. I know that actually, let me pull it up. I believe it was On3 or 247. Yeah, On3 and 247 both have him as a 4-star top 300 player. On3 has him as number 287. 247 has him at number 214, and ESPN also jumped him up to a 4-star. That's not getting talked about by Notre Dame fans who have convinced themselves that this is a bad receiver class. I just told you two guys that don't take my word for it. If you think, well, you're a Notre Dame, cool. Well, 247 is not at all pro Notre Dame, like not even a little bit. And they have 2 of Notre Dame's receivers as 4-star top 250 guys. And On3, who I don't think is pro Notre Dame, anti Notre Dame. I just, they have misses like everybody else. They have positions they're not good at. Some they're whatever. My beef with On3. They also have this kid as a 4-star top 300 player. ESPN has 3 of the 4 recruiting services have this kid as a 4-star player. So that's what I keep saying, Trevor. Like, this is just because you never heard of him, and because he wasn't ranked high when they got him, and they flipped him from South Florida. And I think that's what kind of rubbed people the wrong way. Where if you look at it, you say, boy, this is a dynamic athlete from Georgia that the recruiting services are now giving love to, post Notre Dame commitment, by the way. Then, and you look at what he does with the ball and say, like, that's a really good pickup. It's not getting talked a lot about. This is a good football player. And you're starting to see more people coming around on Elijah as well, except Notre Dame fans, because they've kind of locked in on he was a 3-star when he committed, and that's just kind of what he is. That's why I say this is a much better recruiting class, receiver class, than people give it credit for. But I'm also not going to jump on the train of I'm excited because it's signing day and say, let's give him an A. You know what I mean? Like, there's work to be done. Elijah's got to get stronger. Elijah's got to, get a little bit more burst. He's got to learn the game a little to a degree, but a lot of tools. Scrap's got all the athleticism. He's got to learn how to play the position. And then with Jerome, who went from a 3-star player, like top 500 type of guy, not really sure he should be offered Notre Dame, and the only reason he got the scholarship is because his name's Jerome Bettis Jr., to a guy where his name was Jerome Anderson and his dad drove a UPS truck, like my dad did, then you're like, okay, it's a good football player. Like, okay, it's a bit of a risk, but this kid's got some tools. And I did not feel that watching Jerome as a junior. I thought this is Jerome Bettis' kid, and that's why he's at Notre Dame. I'm just going to be honest. You watch the senior year, Trev, and you're like, this kid got a lot better. And I already talked about, did I earlier give his, did I go over his numbers jump? Did I do that earlier?
I don't think numbers jump. We just talked about skill set on the field, what he improved on.
Yeah, let me give you his numbers jump as well, because Jerome, as a junior, Jerome caught in 14 games, caught 30 passes for 369 yards and 4 touchdowns. And as a senior, he caught 36 passes for 630 yards. So he went from 12.3 per catch to 17.5 in 7 touchdowns. And he's also a kid that had 47 tackles on and 2 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles on defense. So, this is a kid who the number jumped. He was a little bit more smooth. He comes off the line better. His ball skills have always been good. Like, that's the one thing Jerome always had, is that kid could catch the stinking football. And he was a great red zone weapon, because you could see him in camps. Guys would be covering all over him. You still put that ball up, and Jerome's going to go get it. That's the one thing he could do, is catch the football. He just wasn't going to get any separation, and there's still some issues there. But you watch him as a senior, guys, and if you remember the board, I actually put all the highlight videos in one thread. There's a couple that I don't have senior film up, so I put their junior film, but like all 25 of the signees, even the kicker, there's a thread on the message board in the Champions Lounge that I put all their videos. So it's not links to it, but it's literally embedded in the thread. You can watch all their film. And if you watch Jerome's highlight film, and you can see it in game film too, you're going to see a much better athlete. We never saw Jerome really stretching the field as a junior and a sophomore. He's catching post routes, go routes. He's doing all that stuff as a senior, and he's also a two-way player. So his grade improved, Trev. He actually, not only did he jump up from a 3-star to a 3.5-star, but he's closer to being a 4-star now than he is to being a 3-star on my system, on my grading system. That's how much he improved. Nobody on offense went higher in their ranking than him, based off improvement. Will Black went up simply because, as I said, I kind of had a little bit of an incomplete grade on him because of a lack of film. So Will Black, that's what really resulted in his. This is more of Jerome. I had plenty of film on Jerome, and that's what I thought of him. And now I have senior year film of Jerome, and it's changed completely to where you're now like, dude, that's your number 3 receiver. Okay, that's not a bad group. So that was also something, because honestly, Trev, if we're being real, open about this, when he was committed based off junior film, they had 3 receivers in the class, but in my opinion, they really had 2. I'm just being honest. Now, after watching this kid's film, you're like, okay, they got 3 receivers in this class, like 3 legit Notre Dame-ish caliber players in their class. And that's what caused the grade to go up. I thought about giving a B-, but I'm like, no, there's just too many question marks. There's just, and that's why I kept it at a C+. But it was like a C before. Now it's a C+, and it's a quality class. They were picking up one and a good player away from being better. And I don't know that John Anthony Hall would have been that guy. Like, yeah, you could have got him, and he's ranked, but like, he doesn't add to the receiver room what it's missing. And he would just be another number 2, number 3 type of guy, good football player, but he wouldn't have moved the needle. He just would have made people feel better because of his ranking. But that's not, it's more of that high level kid. There's no Cam Williams in this class, right? There's not even a Jaden Greathouse in this class. There's no, Chase Claypool in this class. And that's what it's missing. And if you could have got that, then we'd be having a way different conversation. But my point is, when you're only that guy away, it's not a bad class.
Sure.
Now you just got to go out and get that guy next year.
Right.
And that's going to be the key for them.
Yeah, the wide receiver room leaves a lot of room for excitement, the way that I look at it. I love what Jerome Bettis Jr. did his senior year. Because his junior year, to your point, Brian, he was just kind of like one of the more athletic guys on his team that was just playing receiver because he could catch really well. In his senior year, he turned into a good receiver. He did a better job at stacking routes, which is something that he wasn't doing because he doesn't have elite speed. He doesn't have that speed where you see a lot of high school kids that have that and they can just blow by kids. And that's not what Jerome Bettis Jr. has. But I will say, out of all, the one that I'm most excited to kind of watch and keep track of his Notre Dame career is Antavius Richardson. Because I think he's a guy with, to your point, the toolbox that he has makes me really excited to see what he's going to look like, come sophomore. He's not going to be a guy where, you know how we're talking about, where's Cam Williams been this year? Where's Micah Gilbert been this year? I don't view Scrap Richardson that way, but I'm excited to see what he's going to be like after he develops more into a wide receiver. It kind of seems like, hey, like sophomore year, let's see what he does in that spring game. That's where I'm going to be watching him for. So I'm excited to see what he does.
So one thing that's nice about this receiving class is they're all early enrollees, and that's going to be huge for them for different reasons. For Jerome and Elijah, it's going to be more about, I can't wait to get them in the strength program. So Elijah needs to get stronger. They both need to get a little bit more juice.
Yeah.
Right. You hope it can come. We've seen guys do that before. A lot of guys get a little extra juice when they get to college. The other one is Scrap. It's more, yes, he needs to get stronger because he's a skinny kid.
Yeah.
But with Scrap, it's going to be great for him to be with the other wideouts during January workouts, during February workouts, during March workouts, and getting into spring ball. He's going to get a whole lot more. He's going to have some rough moments as a receiver in spring ball. But I'm telling you, when we're at spring practices, if they let us in any spring practices, there are going to be some times you're like, he's just going to say, go run a post route, and he's going to know what to do. And you're like, okay, that looked good.
Yeah.
And then they're going to ask him to run a comeback route, and it's going to take 8 steps for him to get out of his break because he doesn't know how to do it yet.
Right.
But there's going to be some moments you're like, oh, okay, yep, that's what when the other stuff figures it out, that's going to be a package. And that's why it's really important that all 3 of those guys are going to be early enrollees. They all need that extra time. It's going to be big for all of them. And that's the only thing I'd say. Maybe Scrap could work into the rotation in some regard because of that. You know what I mean? Those are that extra time, but more likely than not, they're all going to need a year before they're really ready to make an impact that's not injury related, meaning, people get hurt.
Yeah.
Whereas like Leonard Moore kind of let everybody know that, hey, I'm going to play this year the minute he got here. I don't know that any of these guys are going to be that. Sure. Benjamin Morrison was that way. Christian Gray was that way at those positions. Jaden Greathouse was that way at wide receiver, where he's like, okay, he's going to play. And you talk about it, it's like, look, a guy like Antavius Richardson, he's more athletic than Jaden Greathouse was. He's more athletic than what Rico Flores was. But those guys were seasoned, like 3,000 career receiving yards in high school guys, which is why they were more ready to play as freshmen. And could potentially need a little bit more time.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving the needle forward here, Brian, talk about the tight end and what this elite tight end can do for this class and what the outlook is for him being in here.
We're talking about James Flanagan. He's one of the best tight ends in the country, in my opinion. He's a different type of tight end than a lot of the other quote unquote top tight ends. They looked at some different players, the Waverly kid, Andrew Olesh. They're more of the new school receivers that line up in the slot and move around and kind of, this is a Michael Mayer type of guy. That if you want to comp, James Flanagan is like Michael Mayer with a little bit more speed. He's not as polished as Michael was coming out of high school. Michael Mayer was ready to play right now as a route runner, as a pass catcher. James is still pretty raw as a route runner, but he's 6'5", 230, plays both ways, punishing blocker. Very good hands, good body control, catches the ball really well, Trev, but he's got a gear in him that we don't get to see a whole lot at tight end. Occasionally they'll let him run a seam route and you're like, whoo, man. But this kid's just an excellent athlete he's a great hockey player. I think he does. He said he broke his dad's, I have to ask Ryan, but I think it was shot put or discus. I forget which one it was. I'd have to ask Ryan, but he broke his dad's state record last year. So this isn't a kid that's playing football year round. And so by the time he gets to Notre Dame and football becomes his only thing athletically, you're going to see his game take off. But this is a kid that, there's two kids on this team, this offensive class that I think could play right away. And it's Will Black and James Flanagan. And he is a guy that complements last year's tight end really well, because Jack Larson is more of a slot, move around, movement tight end. James Flanagan is basically, he blocks like Cooper Flanagan, but he's got the pass catching potential production-wise of a Michael Mayer. A 40, 50-plus guy as a pass catcher. He's got a little bit more juice than Michael had. He's not quite as strong as Michael was, but he's a better blocker than what Michael was coming in. And this kid's a dude. He's a top 100 player for me. And it's funny. He's one of those weird ones because there are some recruiting services that love this kid. And there are others that, for whatever reason, don't, and I don't know why. So when you look at his recruiting profile, him and Jadon Blair have two of the more odd recruiting profiles in this class. Let me pull it up, because I think Rivals recently dropped him out of their top 300. And let's see here, James Flanagan. Did I put that one in? No, I haven't put that one in yet. So Rivals has him ranked out of their top 300. 247 on 3 and ESPN all have him between 105 and 111. Now, I forget which one it was, but one of them recently had him in the top 100, so they've dropped him down a little bit. This is a top 100 kid for me. Like, just no-brainer. But if I have him as a no-brainer top 100 kid and you got him at 105, 107, 111, that's kind of splitting hairs a little bit. We're not way off. I can't believe they have him outside top 100. Where's he ranked? 105. Those idiots. Like that. No. Then I'm like 180, 190. I'm like, guys, you're off 100 spots on this kid. You're off 10, 15 spots. We're on the same page, right? And then Rivals just drops him out of the top 300 altogether. Yours is like, okay, that's kind of weird and random. But they missed on him, in my opinion. This is a dude. This is a top player. This is an impact player. This is a kid that could help you. I'll just be shocked if he's not playing as a freshman in some capacity. I'll be a little surprised. I mean, maybe you got Cooper Flanagan. You've got Eli Raritan coming back. You'll have Jack Larson. Maybe he doesn't play a whole lot, but I just have a feeling that this is going to be a kid that's going to be hard to keep off the field next year. He could use – the only counter to that would be he could use a little bit of development in the technical part of the game, which is harder for a guy that doesn't play football year-round. He's not going to 7-on-7 camps because he's playing hockey or he's in track. He plays both ways. He's a pretty good defensive end, too. I don't think he's as good of a defensive end at Notre Dame as he is a tight end, but if there was ever a need, he could play for Notre Dame at tight end or defensive end. He wouldn't be the impact guy as a tight end, though, and that's why I like him a tight end. But as a blocker, I could see him helping you out right now. I mean, he's stronger than what Cooper Flanagan was coming out of high school. He's about the same size, and he's a better athlete. And Cooper played a little as a freshman, so I could see that. I could. He's really good.
Yeah, he's a really, really good blocker. I think his success on the defensive line kind of helps that, honestly. I mean, sometimes you see, especially you mentioned it with those new age tight ends, like they don't really like to stick their nose in there and block too much. They like to be that finesse type of receiver, and he's more of that. I don't want to call him old school, but he's just more of like a traditional. That's fair. Yeah. And that's how Mayer was, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's partly why Mayer's not like Michael Mayer hasn't done a whole lot in the NFL now, but if Michael Mayer was playing in the 1980s and 1990s, he'd be a dude.
Yeah.
In the NFL, in my opinion. And he was in college.
Oh yeah.
So really, really good player. Really good player.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's dive into what you had brought up, kind of spearheading this offensive class a little bit, and talk about the offensive line pickups that Notre Dame got in 2025 and your breakdown of those individual guys.
So I give the class as a whole, the offensive line class as a whole, an A-. It's the same as last year's class. And the reason I give it an A- is because I do think the bottom of it is not quite as high as the top of it. And I think behind Will Black, the next two guys are more of the low floor, high ceiling type of guys. And the way that I rank the 4-man class, it's Will Black, number 1, is a 5-star, top 25 caliber player. I think he's the number 2 overall player in the country, according to On3. I believe he's still that high, right? They have him ranked number 2. Rivals now has him as a 5-star, ranked number 19. So I'm now in line with them. It's funny. Usually it's the other way around. They eventually become in line with what we had early. But in this instance, because I admitted why I just didn't have enough film. I couldn't do it. I mean, I loved to make him a 5-star like everybody else was, but I just didn't have the film to do it. And I have that now. And he's a dude. He's a top 250 player or top 25 player. I have Owen Streebig next as a top 150 player. Big, strong, physical kid. I'll talk about him. Matty Augustine's more of a borderline top 250 guy with a super high ceiling. And then Cam Herron's the polar opposite. Cam Herron might be the second best high school offensive lineman in this group. But the how does his skill set project to the next level is lower. And so that's kind of where I look at it, man, is this. There's a little bit too much need to work in this group. There's only the one, okay, that's a dude kind of guy. I think you need kind of a second of those guys to be an A, whether it's a upside or whatever. And so I went A-, but that's still, they're a top 5 to 7 offensive line group. I mean, and I'm being a little bit picky at having an A-, to be honest with you, because I'm trying to be, okay, let me be critical, not just, you get an A, you get an, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
So I get A-. I originally had him as an A, but as I, put a more critical eye to it, I did bring it down a tad. I also think that the one thing that's different for, I wonder if Will Black might have a similar issue that Joe Alt had initially when he came to Notre Dame, which is that was a big jump in competition. Like, I can't stand when people will bring a kid's grade down because the competition he plays. That's irrelevant. You're a 4.5 or you're a 4.5. It doesn't matter. What competition matters, however, is it helps with your transition. When you are playing against the kind of competition that Kingston Viliama also plays, it's gonna be so much easier for you to transition into college because the jump between what you face and what you're in high school and what you're facing now is not nearly as stark as what Joe Alt faced at Totino in Minnesota, and what Will Black will face at Rosemary Hall. Now, that league has a lot more Division I players now than it used to, but it's going to be a jump. Same with Matty Augustine. So that also factored into my grade is these guys might need a little bit more of a transition time. That's what kind of happened with Gerby a little bit this year. Is Gerby Lambert again? He was just so much bigger and stronger. Had Gerby played in Ohio at the high level, if he was at St. Ignatius, or if he would have played at, one of the big Jersey Catholic schools, or if he would have played out in LA, he'd be way more ready to play as a freshman. Doesn't change his talent and upside at all. It's just how quickly can a guy get ready to play. And that's kind of how I look at it. But I like, so obviously Will Black's a dude. Owen Streebig's a guy that I like as well. He's a little bit more of a higher floor, lower ceiling guy. Big physical kid, 6'7", 6'8", depend. I mean, he's listed at 6'7" by Notre Dame. Same height as Will Black. I've seen those two standing next to each other. Owen Streebig's taller than Will Black. They're both monsters. There's this photo that was going around when Deuce was still committed, and it was Deuce Knight standing next to the 3 offensive linemen. And Deuce is like 6'5", and they're just like towering over him. Owen Streebig, the change for Owen for me has gone from, I thought he could be a right tackle, maybe a left tackle in high school. As I watch his senior film, I think he's probably more of a slide inside and be a power guard like Sullivan Absher. Could play right tackle, but I think could also end up being a guard. So that's really the change for me. I still view him as a top 150 caliber player. If he can work on his footwork and maybe get a little bit more agile, bend a little bit better, I think he could be even better. That's why the upside grade is 4.5 star upside grade. He's a really good football player. Like him, Matty Augustine's a little bit different than Owen, where Owen is about the floor and Matty's about the ceiling. This is still a kid that's only been playing football for a few years. If you go watch the film of when he first started playing football, he was like this really super skinny kid that like would roll his shirt up and show his abs. Now he looks more like a lineman. He looks great because he was a basketball player. He went to Brunswick to play basketball, and then obviously they finally convinced him to be a football player, and it's worked out well for him. And big kid, 287. He handles my concern with him was how would he handle the big jump in weight, and I think he's handled that pretty well. He still moves well. His issues are more technical. He's got to develop a better feel for the game, in my opinion, on the edge. He's got to learn the nuances of playing offensive line. He's got to learn to use his hands better. He's got to learn to bend a little bit more at the knees as opposed to kind of being a little bit tight in the knees. But the thing is, you watch him move, he's not tight athletically in the knee. Like his body's not tight. It's a technique thing. It's because he's still kind of new to football. But the tools are there, man. I mean, he's 6'6". He's got very long arms, great wingspan. He's athletic. He can change direction with relative ease when his technique is right. You can, because like if a guy has 20 pass sets and 5 of them are the really smooth and quick and the other 15 aren't, he doesn't have an athletic limitation because you don't, like if I'm a 4.9 40 in my heyday, I'm faster than that, but like now I'm a 6 flat. Well, put it like this. If I ran a 6'5" now at my age, I'm not going to just have that one. I felt really good, so I ran a 4.5. I'm going to be 6'5" or 6'3" or 6'7". It's like if you can show really smooth change of direction half your snaps, you're capable of doing it for all your snaps, but you've got some sort of technical issue that's keeping you from doing that, right? And so that's kind of where I see Maddie. Maddie's got a lot of technical work that's needed. A lot more experience playing the position is needed, but I love the length. He's got some really good pop too, Trevor. He's got some really Will Black has some pop. Will Black's an elite athlete for that size. I mean, he is incredibly long, incredibly athletic, strong. Like you watch him work around on traps and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a 6'7", 300-pound kid. His frame is massive. He's going to be 320 when it's all said and done. Like he is a monster, but he's athletic. Maddie's got some of that in him. He's not as advanced as Will, but he's athletic. He's a good athlete when he's right athletically, but he's got some meanness to him that I did not expect a former basketball player to have. With all due respect to you basketball players, when I think basketball, I don't really think guy that's going to play with an edge. But I guess I should. I mean, I should be like, he's more of a Charles Oakley. Maybe he was more of a Charles Oakley, Bill Laimbeer type of basketball player. You know what I mean? Like
an old school guy.
Yeah, but he's got some attitude to him. And then honestly, I'll be honest with you. This is human nature. Sometimes I look at a kid and I wonder how tough that kid is. I'm not gonna lie to you. And I saw Matty do his press conference. He's got his hairs all, and he's wearing a suit. And I'm just like, is this kid really like going to be nasty? And then you pop on the film and you're like, oh, okay, all right. This kid's got some nastiness to him.
Yeah.
And you're like, boy, this kid's got some tools. He's going to need time. Like I think Will Alt can help, or Will Black can help you right now. I think Owen Streamyard might be able to help you in your first couple years.
Yeah.
Matty Augustine might need some time, but if the light goes on, oh yeah, he's got some tools. He's got a lot of tools. And then the last one for me is Cam Herron. Love this kid's high school film. His highlight tip's like 14 minutes long. It's ridiculous. Notre Dame's recruiting him as a center. Matty and Will Black are, to me, more tackles that could play guard. But if you can play tackle, more often than not, you can play guard. I mean, that's in Notre Dame's system. That's just how it works. Not all guards can play tackle. So those two guys are tackles. I think Owen's more of a right tackle guard, and then Cam Herron's more of a center. Tough kid. Really, he's not real. His long speed and long athleticism is great. Like he's not a great like puller, but his short area quickness is really good, and he works to the second level with really good quickness. So he's got some of that. Really tough kid, strong, super long arms. Lot to like about him. Plays with a great motor. Seems like a real smart player. You can just see the way he plays the game. You talk to people about him. There's a lot of intelligence to his game. There's a lot to like about him, but Matty grades as a top 250 guy based on tools. Owen Streamyard is a top 150 guy, size, power, tools. This kid I grade as a 3.5-star kid with 4-star upside. And the big concern I have is just size, because he's already kind of a thicker kid. He's listed at 6'2", 276. He's got apparently, really long arms. You can see how long they are. What we were told about his arm length was insane, but I just wonder how my fear is that he's going to have a Zeke Carell problem. And if you remember watching Zeke Carell in high school, he was 6'2.5", 265, athletic, quick. But Zeke had a hard time staying healthy as they put 30, 40 pounds on him. And he got tightened up a little bit, and he just couldn't stay healthy. Trevor Ruland had a similar problem. Trevor Ruland was a really twitchy high school lineman, but Trevor Ruland is one of the few guys I've ever given like a 3.5-star grade to with a 5-star upside. Because it was like if he can hold up size-wise, that guy had great film. And Trevor was a try-hard guy in college, but when they put all that weight on him, he lost some of his explosiveness. And then also his body broke down a little bit more because he wasn't a naturally 300-pound guy. And so his body just – and that's what happened to Zeke a little bit at Notre Dame also, although he had a really nice year at NC State. But that's the only question I have on this kid, Trevor, is can he hold up? In everything, you love his toughness. You love his want-to. You love his short area quickness. You love his length. You love his punch. You love his football IQ. Like, you know, as Jay Lamont said in the chat, that he wants to be at Notre Dame. I love all those things. At the very least, this kid's going to be a great rotation guy, a great backup center guard that you just, boy, I'm sure glad you had him in a pinch. If the size can hold up and he can play at 295, 300 pounds and still be quick, still be all those things, then I think he'll have a chance to be a starter down the road. Because the toughness is there, the length is there. I just worry about the size. Can he hold up? Can he put on enough weight to play? Can he hold it? That's my big question with Cam. And that's one of the also reasons when your number 4 guy is like that, that's going to drag the grade down just a little bit overall.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I really like this offensive line class. I'm in the same boat as you. I am. One of the highlights that I saw of Will Black, and now, you know, it gets you excited, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of translation into him being an offensive lineman at Notre Dame. But a testament to his athleticism is they threw him a screen pass in high school, and he took it 49 yards to the house. And you don't really do that with a whole lot of not athletic talent.
And he was moving.
He was, man.
He was moving.
Yeah, moving. So leaves a lot of room for excitement. But what you talked about with Matty Augustine, I really liked, because the thing that kind of popped out on film to me is sometimes it almost feels like he goes out of his way to finish blocks. Like, not that it's a detriment to the play, but I was with you when I saw that he was a basketball player and somebody that was, you know, more athletic. He was a lot thinner when he was starting to play football, and man, that guy like enjoys mauling people when he gets the chance. And so it's exciting to see, man. I'm really excited to see what this offensive line class does. But I know, Brian, you wanted to talk about overall offensive grade and the grade for this class. So what say you?
So the offensive class is the one that brings down the overall grade from a potential top 5 class, because it's just not a top 5 offensive class. It's just not. And it's a good offensive class. I give it a B. It's a B offensive class. You got a excellent, with a chance to be even better, because there's some potential, there's some upside in this class, Trev, that I really like. And so, you know, there's a lot of tools to work with, but right now there's a lot of projection in this class. And it's hard for me to view a class as an A class when as much projection is needed. You need Scrap to do this. You need Elijah to do that. You've got to get better here. You hope that this gets better there. And it's hard for me to say, you know, B+, A-. There's a lot of tools here. This has a chance to be an excellent offensive line class. It's got a chance to be you've got one of the best tight ends in the country. I love the running back. You've got a quarterback with a lot of tools, receivers with a lot of tools, but also quarterback needs a lot of work. Receivers need a lot of work, and few of your linemen need some work. And so that's why I give it a B. And B for me is an outstanding class that's top 15 caliber. This is one of the 15 or so best offensive classes in the country. It is. It's just not elite top 5. You're going to win a championship because of this group based on what it is now. But there's a lot of upside in this group, and that's what I like about it. But it's going to need a lot of work. And why that matters, Trevor, is because when you have guys that need a lot of work, and like your class is filled with those type of guys, your success rate is usually lower on those type of guys. Some of them are going to hit, but you're not going to, and this is where you get into the stars debate. Well, you need you don't need 5-star recruits. You need 5-star players, right? And 5-star players can be 2 stars. They can be 3 stars. They can be 4 stars or 5 stars coming out of high school. Joe Alt was a 3-star player coming out of high school. You know, Kyle Hamilton, when he came into Notre Dame, was a 3-star player. Eventually they figured it out, got it right. ESPN didn't think Quentin Nelson was a top 100 recruit coming to high school. I mean, you know, Rivals thought he's a 5-star. Like, it's nice to get those guys that are 5 stars, but I don't care about that. I care about 5-star talent. And that's why I keep in what annoys me is when people look at a player and see 3-star and say, well, he can't play. It's nonsense. And then they give you the whole percentage thing. But if it's a percentage, then you're telling me that some 3 stars become 5 stars. correct? And so that's where the star ranking debate drives me nuts. Well, I don't care about percentages. I care about, does this guy have that type of potential? Having said that, if you're talking about building a roster and not looking at where on the micro level, it annoys the crap out of me when people talk about he's a 3-star, so I'm not going to be excited about it. Annoys the crap out of me. On the macro level, big picture, if you have a class filled with 3-star kids or even 4-star kids that are projectables, right? They need a lot of work, like a Scrap Richardson, right? He's a 4-star, but he's a 4-star that needs a lot of work. The hit rate's going to be lower. The odds of you hitting on as high of a level is, if you filled a roster with all 5 stars, is going to be lower. I've never debated that. It's star ranking is not determinative of an individual player. That's why I say they don't matter. You throw a star on a guy, it doesn't make him a better player. You take a star away from a guy, it doesn't make him a worse player. His talent is what it is. But when you take a lot of guys, not that are 3 stars, but more that are projectables, guys that need work, low floor, high ceiling, whatever their ranking is, that's where I say your hit rate's likely going to be a little lower. And that's my concern about this offensive class. But sometimes a lot of them do hit. And we've already seen that at Notre Dame with the last couple of classes. So that's where I look at it and say, that's what keeps it from being a higher graded class. But it's not the average not top 25 like some people are saying it is. I like this offensive class. It's just not on the same level as the defense. And so it's a good addition. We'll talk about the two-way grades here in a bit, but that's where I'm at with the offensive class. It's a good offensive haul. It's got the potential to be really good, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm with that analysis. I mean, I think you said it best when you said on offense, Notre Dame has 2 guys that might be able to contribute in their first year on campus. And not saying that this is just like a science experiment of like a bunch of projects that they're going to have to work on and maybe their senior year they're going to contribute. It's nothing like that. But they do have very limited guys that have the potential to come in and make an impact right away, which is fine. And I think we're going to dive into like some reasons as to why when we look at the 2024, 2025 kind of recruiting comparison as a whole, you know what I mean? But no, I agree. I would have the offensive class as a B as well, because there's a lot of good. There's a lot of good, but there are the ifs. If Herron can keep the weight on and play at the same athleticism, if Scrap Richardson can make the transition to wide receiver, if Jerome Bettis Jr. can continue ascending the way that he did his senior year of high school. So I'm with you. I agree. Well, that's going to do it for the offensive portion of this recruiting breakdown. But don't go anywhere. We're still going to dive into the defense, but you guys know what to do in the meantime. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Share this podcast. Make sure you guys go to boards.irishbreakdown.com to see all of our exclusive content, and that's how you're going to be able to stay in the know. So make sure you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Brian, we knocked out the offensive portion. Now it's time to take a dive into the defensive portion, and you had already alluded to this is kind of what's carrying the weight for this overall class and why you have them so highly ranked. So let's start off. You want to go defensive line here? Do you want to
go front to back? Yep.
All right.
Go front to back.
Sounds good. So
gotta start with the big boys, man.
Yep.
Gotta start with the big boys.
Let's start with the trenches. Start with the trenches, man.
Well, this is the one part of the defensive class that I have lower than the others. And I gave the defensive class a B. It's a top 15-ish caliber class, in my opinion. And let's start with the way that I rank them. My number one guy in the class is Christopher Burgess. He is like the defensive line version of Scrap Richardson in that he just needs a lot of work. Actually, a better example would probably be Matty Augustine, but he's got more tools. He's a massive kid. Notre Dame listed him at 6'3", 245. He looked a little taller than that to me when I met him this summer. Maybe that's because he has a big afro, so maybe he looks a little taller than he actually is, but he's super long. He's got incredibly long arms. He's got a really big, thick, powerful body. Strong kid, still learning the game. Like he's got a lot to learn about the game, but he saw a jump as a senior, Trev, and he started to use his hands better. He's got a nice power burst off the edge. He's not going to be playing Viper. He's not like Bubakar. He's got that. He could go play Viper. He's a pure power end right now. That you put at that defensive end position in that rotation next year with Josh Burnham and Bryce Young, and you're like, dude, you're good. You know what I mean? He's that kind of guy. Strong, powerful. Pass rush ability improved this year. His production took a jump this year. He had over 100 tackles this season. Had I think 5 or 6 sacks, and they move him all around. To one point in time, like last year, they had him playing a lot inside. This year, they had him playing outside more. But then after a while there, they started putting him at middle linebacker, and he was playing middle linebacker. And I'm thinking, and I played against a lot of D1 dudes, right? I mean, I would not have wanted to line up against Christopher Burgess as a middle linebacker in high school. No. Like, just sorry, hard pass on that action. You know what I mean? But this is a kid that's just got a lot of tools, Trev, and, massive kid, big, strong kid, really nice kid too. Like, that's what I love about him. He's not a guy that's just, he's kind of quiet, but when you get him on the football field, man, he's got an edge to him. Like you meet Chris, I don't know that I've ever seen the kid smile, but he's just got, real quiet, real calm kid. I love the background. For those that don't know the story, Chris is one of those guys that when he first started looking at her and said, look, if you want to get here, you got some work to do in the classroom. So if you want to be here, you need to do A, B, C, and D. And Chris did it. Boom, just nailed it and got it all done. He's at Notre Dame, wants to be here, beat Ohio State and Michigan out for him. He had over 100 tackles this season. He had offers from Bama, Florida. I mean, because everybody saw the tools, and he started to put those together this season, Trev, and he's just a massive kid. He was a top 150 guy for me when they landed him because he did need a lot of work. He made a lot of improvements, and he was much more productive this year. I regraded him, and he's now a top 100 guy for me with a 4.5-star upside grade. Very close to being a 5-star upside guy, but I couldn't quite pull the trigger on the 5-star. But he's a top 50 caliber guy for me, upside-wise. He's also a kid that I like him at defensive end. That's where I like him right now. But when you look at the frame, Trevor, sometimes I get some like Riley Mills type of vibes from him, body type wise, because he's got real broad shoulders that maybe it just naturally he's going to get up to 280, 285, 290. And all of a sudden you're like, either A, you move him inside permanently, or B, he becomes your 3 technique and third down passing situations. Like that, I'm almost certain of. He'll have some of that. But more of on a permanent basis, maybe. He's got a little bit of that. I would let him grow naturally. I wouldn't force that weight on him, but if he's just, you get some strength program and the nutrition program, all of a sudden you're like, dude, he's 280. We got to keep weight off him. Don't. Just let him do it naturally. And then next thing you know, he's the next Riley Mills type of guy. But there's a lot of tools with this kid. Trev.
No, his length, I think, is the most eye-popping thing for me. Now, it could have just been because the game that I watched of his, he was just in like white long sleeves, which just makes everybody. No. But man,
I've stood next to the kid during visits and during the Irish invasion. It's real. He's super long. He's super long. Next guy for me is actually Dom Hulak. Now, he was my number 5 defensive lineman, or number 4 defensive lineman when he committed, just ahead of Gordy Solstead. He's now my number 2. And what I saw, a really strong, try-hard guy, not a real twitchy guy, not a top-level athlete, smart kid. Saw him this summer at the Irish Invasion. I'm like, huh. Because I saw him the year before the Irish Invasion. And he's playing linebacker, and I just didn't see great lateral quickness. I didn't see great burst. His film was really good for high school, but I just didn't see that high-level athleticism that you want for a guy that's going to play Viper. And so I didn't like the move, I'll be honest with you. And I'll have a comment about the defensive line grade, what could have made it different. But now watching him as a senior, Trev, you're like, okay, this kid is a 4-star player. Dom Hulak had a huge jump for me as a senior. His burst off the edge was outstanding. His ability to move laterally was a lot better, a lot more impressive to me. Really, really just his ability to kind of plant and explode down him. Because like some of the things I didn't love about him as a linebacker don't matter as a Viper. You know, can you plant, drive, and run this way 50 yard? Doesn't need to do that as a Viper. But that downhill burst off the edge took a jump, and he got a little bit bigger. He's got a lot better length than I thought he had when you see him up. Now, I don't know if he got longer, but like I didn't notice that when I saw him 2 summers ago. You see that I saw that this summer. As I said earlier, he's one of my biggest risers to where he's now a top 150, borderline top 150 kid. I still have him in the top 250, but his grade is closer to being in the 150 than it is to being out at 250. So he saw a big jump for me this offseason, and he's now the number 2 guy. Now you have 2 good ends in this class from the Chicago area. That's huge. You have a Viper and an end. So 2 edge players, excuse me. You have an end and a Viper. And 2 guys that have now, like before I thought Dom was going to be like a rotation. He still may be a rotation guy, but he now showed me starting caliber talent for that Viper position. I mean, you talk about a comparison. He's a longer version of Jordan Botelho. That's what I saw from him on film. Taller, longer version of Jordan Botelho. Very similar skill set, very similar athletic ability from what I saw from Jordan now. That's quite a comp. Because Jordan Botelho's a pretty good player when he wanted to.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's a good comp. That's definitely a good comp.
Next guy on the board for me, I'm going to have Gordy Solstad's going to be at the bottom as an asterisk because he didn't play his senior year. Next guy on the board for me is Joseph Reif. He's one of the guys that his grade is a little bit lower than I originally had it. I had him as a 4-star guy that was a top 250 guy that was very close to a top 150 guy. He's now borderline top 250 for me. Like he's close to getting down to 3.5 star. Excellent high school football player. Really, really good high school football player. The issue for me, Trev, is that the frame to me wasn't quite what I hoped it would be. He doesn't quite. I thought he was a guy that was going to end up becoming a 3 technique, and he doesn't have the frame for that after seeing him this summer. But what he is he's still if he's your number 3 end. He's a defensive end. He's going to be right behind Chris Burgess. He's a try-hard kid. He's a quality athlete. Like I like the athleticism didn't take a big drop for me. Like that's still good. It's still quality athlete. But he doesn't show me the frame anymore to be that kind of that I thought, not anymore. I thought on film he would have to be kind of that real dynamic, just be the next. He was the next Riley Mills potentially the next Riley Mills for me. Super productive high school kid, really good motor, just doesn't didn't take that jump that I was hoping he would take as a senior athletically. And then combine that with the frame, his grade went down a little bit for me. But he's still borderline 4-star kid. I have him in 4-star range. If that's your 3rd end, that's pretty good. You know what I mean? It's just, it sounds negative because of what he was before, but he's still a good football player. If I wouldn't have said anything about what I thought of him before and just said what I liked about him, high motor, super productive, decent length, quality athlete, could be a really good multi-year rotation player for you at defensive end. You'd be like, all right, cool, good pickup. But because I'm trying to be honest about where I had him and where I have him now, then it sounds more negative, but he's still a good football player. And I feel better about it because before I thought your end was going to be Burgess 1, Reif 2, Hulack 3. And now it's like Hulack jumps up to 2 and Reif is still kind of close to where he was before. Now overall, my defensive end grade is much better than what it was. Like if I was going to split these grades between defensive tackle and defensive end, this is a B+ defensive end class for me. Borderline, not there yet, borderline A-, but if you really like Hulack even more than me, you may go there. But for me, it's a solid B+. Like it's a top 10-ish caliber defensive end group. The issue is inside. That's more of the issue. Davion Dixon, I have his grade is gone down a little bit for me. I still like Davion. I still think he brings value to his class. He's 6'1", he's 315. Incredibly productive high school player. This is a kid with a couple hundred tackles, 40, 50 tackles for loss in his career. Benefited greatly by going to Miami Palmetto the last 2 years and getting an up in competition. But as he got bigger, he got a lot stiffer. He's now listed at 6'1", 316. He got a lot stiffer, which is a concern. Can they work that out of him at Notre Dame? That's going to be the key. Can you keep his weight up but maybe get him more flexible? If they can do that, then Davion goes back to being what I hoped he would be, which is a really quality playmaking-ish type of nose, like 4-star, top 200 kind of guy. That's what I had him when they got him. Now he's more of a plugger. You know what I mean? He's more of a Sean Sevillano plugger type of guy, not the guy that's going to be that playmaker. And when I look at that, I say, okay, that he's now down a little bit on my board, different type of. But the thing is, you still need that though. They still need that. Last year you got a 340-pound kid in Sean Sevillano. This year you get a 315-pound kid in Davion Dixon. That's good. You want more beef up there. That's a good thing.
Right. If
Davion can kind of find his motor didn't run as hot as it did when he was younger this past year. You know, like not that he was late. He wasn't lazy. He was like, it wasn't bad. It just was like, he didn't have that same kind of as he did when he was younger. If he can get back to that, I think he's going to be all right. He's going to end up being all right. He's going to end up getting back closer to his upside. But just right now, he gives you beef, which you need. He's got that short, stocky, I can eat up space that you need. He's going to have to improve his technique when you talk about anchoring. He's going to have to get in a little bit better conditioning, you know, and work on his. But his first step is still really good. But I think what the extra weight kept him from having that closing speed on the ball carrier and the quarterback that he had when he was younger. Well, that's something where a training staff like Notre Dame can say, we're going to keep you big, but you're going to get that flexibility back a little bit. We're going to get that burst back a little bit. If they can do that, then Davion goes way up my board again. Because if you could get the playmaking ability he had as a sophomore with the size that he has now, he's going to be a dude. It's just right now, I'm not seeing those two things being present at the same time. I saw the one on the sophomore film and the other on the senior film, but not together. So that's where Davion is a little bit of a wild card for me. All right. If he learns to become Lauren Lando's best friend, me dropping him in my rankings he's gonna make me look stupid when it's all said and done. Right. And I love that. I like when guys make me look stupid when I don't have them ranked as high. You know what I mean? But Davion is that kind of kid where I'm going to look back and be like, dude, I should have trusted my initial grade on him. I should have kept him as a top 150 guy. And now I look like an idiot because, you know, he's a 3-year starter at Notre Dame and I had him as a borderline 4-star kid. You know what I mean? He's got that ability, Trev. It's just, it's going to have to all click. And right now it's not quite clicking where I want it to be.
Sure. And to your point, those are the reasons why you go and you get into like a top-end collegiate strength and conditioning program. But if there's one thing that I took away from his film, he is strong. That is a strong kid, man. I mean,
he's going to eat up space now.
Yeah. That is a strong kid.
Like what I'm saying, Trev, is like I saw him as a borderline 4-star kid.
Yeah.
Because he's strong and he's going to eat up space.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
What I loved about Davion when they first got him is he was a playmaker too. You know, like he was a playmaker. He's just not, that part of it doesn't project as well, but it's still a good football player, still a very good pick.
Oh, yeah.
I'm happy with him. And then the last kid, and this is the biggest disappointment in the class, is Gordy Solstead. Not a disappointment that he did anything wrong. He hurt his knee before the season and was out for the year. I was so excited to see Gordy Solstead senior film because this is a very intriguing kid, Trevor. And so, like, I can't raise his grade. And if anything, the grade goes down a little bit because now you've got the injury concern. So he's now the lowest graded kid in the defensive class, but the upside doesn't change. I get bummed about Gordy Solstead, and then I go back and watch the junior film, and you're like, all right, cool. All right, if he let Al Washington, let Lauren Landau, let Al Golden get this kid, let him cook in the oven for a couple years, and then he's, you know what I mean? Like because I love that he's 6'4", he's listed 6'4" by Notre Dame. He's got really long arms. They had him playing on the edge a lot in high school, and he was a good high school end, right? Good high school end, like all-state kind of guy. But then they'd move him inside at times and put him over to guards, and he was a dude. And you could see that projection, like, all right, when he fills out and he becomes an inside guy, and his dad played in the NFL like 320 pounds, he's going to fill out. His dad was Alex Solstead, played Miami of Ohio, and was in the NFL for a few years, was a 6'3", 320-pound offensive lineman. Gordy's going to fill out. But that's why I was so excited to see a senior film, Trev, because like I think they were going to play him inside more. And on inside, he is the guy that now is like that could be your next Riley Mills type of guy. 6'4", super long arms, broad shoulders, great frame. I think he'll end up being like a 295 to 305 athletic playmaking 3 technique. I love the tools. So he's one of those boomer bust type of guys because he's so raw, because he's got to put on a bunch of weight, because he's, has the ACL, really low floor right now. But as long as everything went right medically with the knee, and that doesn't have the devastating effect it did 10, 15, 20 years ago, he's got a chance that if he clicks, he could be the biggest surprise of this class, of anyone. Because I see it. It would not shock me if Gordy Solstead is having the same kind of production at some point in time of his career that Riley Mills is having right now. I think he's got that type of upside. It's just Riley was a much better player coming into college. Like Riley was ready to play right away. Riley played as a true freshman. The only reason he's playing now still is because of COVID. That's why he played 5 full seasons at Notre Dame.
Yeah,
it's because of COVID, the COVID year. This kid to me is going to be more of a redshirt him, and maybe you don't hear again from him in 2026 either. And all of a sudden, that spring of 2027, we're like, whoa, what the heck is Gordy Solstead doing balling out against the offense? You know what I mean? Like, he's that kind of kid. And the next thing you know, by the time he's a senior, 5th-year senior, you're like, this is a football player right here, man. This kid can play. He's just going to need time. And so there's that. It's like what I was talking about before, that boomer bust type of thing. He may end up never playing a meaningful down in Notre Dame. That wouldn't surprise me. It also wouldn't surprise me if he becomes Riley Mills. And that's the risk you run when you're bringing in kids like this.
Right.
That's the risk you run when your class is made up of Dom Hulaks and Joseph Reefs and Davion Dixons and Gordy Solsteads. Is none of them have the floor. Like Burgess's floor is really high, even though he's super raw, because he's so freaking big and strong and athletic. These other kids are like Chris Burgess is physically built to play college football like right now. None of those other kids are. They're either conditioning wise or size wise. That's the issue with this D-line class. But if they hit on between Reef, Dixon, Hulak, and Gordy, if they hit on one of the inside guys, either Gordy or Davion, and they hit on one of the edge players, either Hulak or Reef, in Burgess, what we think is this is going to end up being a really good defensive line class. But the grade is a little lower because it is so much projection. Does that make sense? I mean,
totally.
And that's where the grade is down, but it's got a chance to be really good. But this is why you needed to go get a Marco Jones. Okay. This is why I believe the staff, one of the biggest mistakes this staff made was not pushing for Marco Jones. Because I think Marco would have given you more of that true twitchy edge viper type of kid that you could have combined with a Hulak, who's more of a Botelho type. I think that Marco Jones is more of a Logan Thomas, Boubacar, long, twitchy type of pass rusher. They would have been a great 1-2 punch there. That was a mistake. I mean, I like what they've done. If the only thing they would have done different in this class, take the same 5 kids we just broke down, but add Marco Jones to this class, it's an A- to A defensive line class. You'd have numbers. You'd have all the positions filled. You'd have 2 super high ceiling guys in Burgess and Marco Jones. You'd have you'd have Hulak, who had a jump. You'd have the upside guy of Gordy Holstead. You'd have the beef of Davion Dixon and the just quality of Joseph Reef. And I'd be super fired up about this class. And so that's what I say. I can't say that it's a bad class. Some people, it's not very good. It's not good enough. Well, I mean, yeah, it needs to get better, but like you can't say if they only added this one guy, then they would be all of a sudden a great class. Well, it means they were really close to being a great class, but now you got to get that one guy. That's the tool. Right. That's the thing for next year. Coach Washington did some really good things in this class. Now next year, keep doing this, but now go get the Marco Jones type.
Yeah.
Go get another Bryce Young type. whose dad isn't a Notre Dame Hall of Famer. Like, that's the thing, is like, if Bryce Young was just some guy, does he come to Notre Dame? We don't know that. We don't know the answer to that because his dad was a Notre Dame Hall of Famer. And that's going to be the key for Coach Washington. Is again, I like this class. You're just that one really twitchy edge guy away from this being a big time D-line class. Now, next year, go get that.
Yeah,
that's the key.
Yep, absolutely. So what was your overall grade for this class? You grade them out at a B, you said?
The D-line Hall is B.
Okay.
Yeah. And if I had to, like, if they'd have got Marco Jones, it's B, probably A- is where I'd be. And if I had to say, it's a B- for the current grade of what they are now, because the injury to Gordy and the upside, but it's a B+ in upside. So I settled on B.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's make the jump over to linebackers. And we touched on it a little bit at the start of the show, but big news coming out of the linebacker room for recruits. What do you got for us for the linebacker room, Brian?
I went A-. And again, I don't hand out many A's, right? I give 3 of them in this class, and 2 of them are on defense. But this is an A-. The only reason it's an A- is because I look, full disclosure, I don't have a lot of film of Josiah Kia. There's a couple highlights out there, but he's an unknown to me. And that drags the grade down a little bit. Now, again, people I've talked to that I respect, they really like the kid. But I can't grade a kid and evaluate a kid based off what other people think about him. I need to see it. And that hurts his grade. That's why he's going to be, I'm not even going to give him a grade in this. When I do my grades class, I won't even give him a grade because it's just not enough for me to grade him on, Trev. It just isn't. So he's a bit of an unknown. So that's, all honesty, that's the thing that drags it down to an A- because I just don't know about him. And that's just trying to be fair about that. The 2 that I do know about is really good. And that's what gets you the A-. You have Anthony Sacca and Madden Faremo. These are 2 outstanding football players, Trev. I mean, just outstanding football players. Yeah. Let's talk about Madden first, because that's the new one. That's the guy that has everybody fired up. I mean, this is a kid that's 6'3", 225. He's got the frame to be thick. He's not as thick as Kingston is, but he's got a similar overall body type, where Kingston's 240, this kid will be 230, that kind of thing. But his short area athleticism and explosiveness is outstanding. I mean, his ability to plant and draw. I mean, he's got a different body type. I'll say this. He reminds me a lot. This is going to sound crazy. And he's not quite as good because he's still the second best, the best linebacker that Notre Dame's ever signed, in my opinion, out of high school, is, like, of my lifetime, is Manti. Jalen Smith was the most explosive athlete. But as far as just the best high school linebacker that I've ever seen Notre Dame sign in my lifetime, so this goes back into the late 90s, is Manti. And Madden reminds me a lot of Manti. Is in that he's an elite in the box athlete. Now, I thought Manti got a little too big at Notre Dame, and he lost a little bit of a step from what he was in high school, to be honest. I don't know why I keep saying that. D-Troll Hunter called me on that yesterday. I'm always honest, so I don't know why I say that. It's just like a verbal twitch. But Madden is very similar to what Manti was coming out of high school, athletically and body type-wise. A little bit taller, a little bit longer than Manti. Short area quickness is outstanding. He gets downhill in a hurry. He's got an outstanding football IQ, just like Kingston did. Just really smart kid, powerful, versatile. And what I mean by that is Madden's the type of kid that can play Mike. He's smart enough. He's instinctive enough. He's athletic enough, and he's powerful enough. He knows how to take on blocks. He knows he can get the defense lined up. His ability to read blocks, to get off blocks, to beat blocks with his technique is outstanding. He's got all the tools to be a really, really good Mike linebacker. Thing I love about him, though, Trev, is he's also got all the tools you need to be a really good will linebacker. He's really good in coverage. He's rangy. So he's not just short area quick, but he's a bit lumbering. That's not him. He's short area quick, and he's got really good long speed as well as a linebacker. He can drop into coverage. He can get up underneath curl routes. He can cover tight ends. He can cover backs out of the backfield. There's times where he's pedaling in coverage, and you're like, dude, that's like, you see high school safeties that would be envious of that back pedal right there. He can flip his hips. And he also can rush the quarterback. He doesn't do it a ton in high school, at least that I've seen, but when he does, you're like, that kid can go. And when I mean, a lot of people talk about moving him to Viper. I don't know, maybe they could do that. When I talk to my sources at Notre Dame, they don't talk to me about Viper. They talk to me about linebacker. But he also is a lot like Kingston in that third down package. You could put him on the edge and say, go get the quarterback. And he's got the explosiveness, the instincts, the feel to win on that. Because like when you watch Kingston make plays this year, it's like he's got that one play where he's coming off the edge and he just dips and rips and gets on. Like that's just a wicked smart football player that's really athletic. Madden has that kind of ability. And I love that about him. He's a very, very, very intriguing player. And then, of course, you have the other top 100 linebackers, Anthony Sacca. Now, Anthony Sacca was one of the guys I was most interested to see as a senior. And here's why. His sophomore safety film was outstanding. And I had him as a borderline top 50 player. Then he put on a bunch of weight as a junior and moved to linebacker. And it was still really good, but it wasn't quite as good as a safety. He was now a borderline top 100 guy for me. So my question was, well, how would he be in year 2 with all the extra weight? Would he move a little better? Would he get a little bit more twitchy? Would he get a little bit more explosive? And that's exactly what he did. And you saw the athleticism that he showed at safety come back a little bit. They played him a lot in the slot this year, on top of playing inside linebacker. Fluid, rangy. The coverage instincts are there from his time playing defensive back, because I'm sure you probably saw one of the people listed him as still as a safety, and that's probably why you had him as a safety. That just tells you a lot about recruiting services and how great they are at evaluating players. They still list that kid as a safety who's now 225 pounds, 6'3", 225. He just handled the weight a lot better. His change of direction was a lot cleaner. A lot of times when the guys get that extra weight, their initial step is still really good, but their closing speed goes bye-bye, right? And that's what happened to Anthony last year, I felt, in the box. Now, once he got us head of steam, he could move now, but that closing speed in the box wasn't there. This year it was. I mean, he would close. There's a couple times where it's like, oh, I think he's got an angle, and then just like, poof, just that last 3-4 steps just explodes to the running back. So Anthony's grade went up for me. I know some other people are dropping him. Not for me. His grade went up for me. He's now cleanly inside the top 100 for me now. And this is like Kingston grades higher than anyone in this year's class, even higher than Madden. But Anthony grades out much higher than what Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak graded out. And I liked those guys, but he is a top, where Bodie I had in the top 250. Teddy was more of an upside guy, skinny, raw, but really athletic, and he was an upside guy. This kid is great right now. It may not be that way in college because Bodie had a ton of upside, but Anthony as a prospect coming out of high school is graded out significantly higher than what Bodie Cahoon did, which makes this linebacker haul overall better than last year's class. Because last year's linebacker class got a B+, because Bodie and Teddy were such projectable kids. Bodie had a great senior year, but still had a lot to learn about linebacker. Teddy was an elite athlete that basically played rover, that's 6'4", 195, and had a lot to learn, but he was really athletic. So last year's class was Kingston was the rock, and then there was a bunch of projectable upside guys, a lot like the D-line, where if it hits and those kids tap into their potential, that's going to be an elite A linebacker haul. But they're raw. This group is more 2 rock-solid top 100 guys, and then your third guy, I don't know a lot about, but from what I hear, he's probably in the Bodie or the Teddy Rizak, or probably more Bodie Cahoon, really productive high school player, athletic, can run and hit, but just is going to need time. He's not as big. Notre Dame listed him at 6'1", 209. I think he's a little bigger than that now. A lot of times they'll put the weight on there that's like what the kid measured in when he first visited, and this kid's been visiting for years. Looks a little bigger than 6'1", 209. Bodie to me, or Anthony to me, is more of a will that could maybe play rover. Josiah, from what little I've seen, is kind of a bit of a do-it-all. He can play some rover in some run situations. He can play will. He could maybe rush the passer as well. I I don't have a lot to say about Josiah because everything I just gave you is literally off highlights. That's it. And not many highlights at that. So that's the thing that keeps this from being an A grade. When you've got two easy top 100 players in your class, that's going to be some sort of A. If I just knew a little bit more about Josiah, I might be able to bump this grade up to an A. But I can't in good conscience do that when one of the kids in the class, a third of the class, I don't have much of a feel for because there's just not a lot of film.
Fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. So another question I have for you then, because your description of Anthony Sacca sounds a lot like the transition that Drew Tranquil made when he was at Notre Dame. So do you see similarities there?
That's the perfect comp for him. He's longer than Drew was. But athletic. Now, I don't know if he's quite as – we'll have to see if he's as – the one difference between him and Drew, I think Drew might have a little bit more just raw speed.
Okay. I
mean, Drew ran a 4.58 at the combine.
Yeah.
Anthony's a lot more fluid than Drew was. Drew's an athletic guy, but like he had pretty decent hips, but he was a little bit tight, change of directions at times. Like I'm saying that when I'm evaluating like a high level player. I mean, I've told this story before, but we were at the pro day and it was him and Tavon Coney working out, and the scouts are trying to get him to drop back and flip their hips on the line, and they're having him run like on the 20-yard line. The reason you do it on the line is because you want to see if when a guy opens up his hips, does he drift? Because if he drifts, he's got tight hips.
Makes
and
sense.
Drew was pretty much like right on that line when he would flip. Tavon turned it into a zigzag drill. Really tight hips.
Yeah.
And Tavon dropping back was not his strength. Tavon was coming downhill. So Drew's not like that, but Anthony's really smooth, really fluid. But in the other areas, like the long range, the speed, the instincts, the body type, Anthony's also longer than Drew was. Drew had very short arms.
Yeah.
Anthony's got longer arms than Drew had. But as far as the transition, you're spot on. And the type of player he was, spot on. If you're going to play a 4-2-5 rover defense like Elko played with Drew, where that third guy's like a true linebacker, but one that plays in space, Anthony Sacca could absolutely play that position. If it's going to be sort of like the nickel type of rover that Al Golden uses, I don't know if he's ideally suited for that, but I'd give him a try because he's really smart in coverage. He's really smooth and fluid, and he's got pretty decent long speed. So I'd give him a shot there, absolutely. But I know he can play at will. And I think Anthony in time could be another guy that in third down could be Jalen Sneed. Not so much Kingston, but Jalen Sneed, that just really and he's 2 inches taller than Jalen and has longer arms. So it seems to be, at least he looks like it on film.
Sure.
I could see him playing that role, where Madden would be more of the Kingston edge rusher. This kid could be more of that fast off the edge guy. But I love this linebacker class. And now third year in a row that Notre Dame has just landed an elite. Actually, it's the fourth year in a row that Notre Dame's landed an elite linebacker class.
Yeah.
It's just the first one was it's 4 now. Yeah. The Burnham, Tui Almaka, Nolan Ziegler, Jalen Sneed class was first. And then you had the Drake Bowen, Jaden Alsbury, Preston Zinner class. And then the Kingston, which is nuts because that's only juniors. And I'm thinking, hold on a second.
Jeez.
But then you had the Kingston, Viliama Asa, Bodie Cahoon, Teddy Rizak class. And now you've got the Madden Faremo, Anthony Sacca, Josiah Kia class. And your defensive end position is now handled because of that linebacker class. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that worked out pretty well. I don't see a lot of those type of guys in these two linebacker classes per se. I mean, you're not going to have anyone that's going to be Josh Burnham. There's nobody that has that kind of body type, but there's a lot of versatility in this group. So I love this linebacker class.
Good deal. Well, let's move on to the corners, which I have a feeling that you said that you had graded out 2 at A grades.
3. One of them was,
grades.
we already said, the tight end.
Yep, 2 on the defensive side. So if I were a betting man, I'd be willing to assume I know which one it is, but I'll let you kind of take the lead on that one. So cornerbacks.
Well, there's 2 positions left, and there's 2 A grades outstanding. I think we can kind of figure out where it is. I'm just going to say this, bro. This is going to sound super hyperbolic, This is the best cornerback I've ever seen Notre Dame land. And I can't really speak to the 90s classes because back then, most of those guys would be listed at running back. You know, like most of those guys weren't like back then. You had a lot more two-way players. There wasn't as much. You know, Lou Holtz would sign 5-6 running backs. One of them would stay at running back. One would go to receiver. One would go to linebacker. One would go to safety or corner, things like that. Right? Like Jeff Burr started at cornerback, and you know, so it's a little different then. But so I'm talking more of like when I really started following recruiting, like around 2000, 2002, when I really was like old enough to understand it, old enough. I mean, I was, 2000, I was in college, you know what I mean? I was playing. So like late 90s, maybe when I was in high school is when I, really started looking at it. And I don't know that it's all that close. I really don't. This is a special cornerback class, in my opinion. Dallas Golden is a star. Mark Zachary's a top 100 recruit, and Cree Thomas is Cree. And if you look back in the last 15 years, Cree Thomas would be the number one cornerback in the class in, I'd be willing to guess, over half of those classes. I'd be willing to like bet that pretty easily. And we'd be sitting in 5-6 years ago, we'd be talking about Cree Thomas as like, oh my gosh, this was such a huge pickup because you needed this type of quarterback. You know what I mean? Like that's what we'd be talking about. And, to see him now, it's like he's the number 3 guy and he's an afterthought in this class. Just tells you everything you need to know about how good this cornerback class is. You know what I mean? Because, there's years like, it's like I think of that 09 recruiting class Notre Dame had, right? And you had, think about who Notre Dame landed in that class. On this, in 2009 and how special it could have been especially on defense. But that class had Tyler Eifert, Sear Wood, Theo Riddick, Chris Watt, Zach Martin, Manti Te'o, Zeke Mata. And then you look at the DB class and it's like EJ Banks. That's literally it. It's the entire DB class. Zeke Mata ended up playing safety. EJ Banks was your corner and he was a quarterback in high school. And you just kind of look at that every year and you had a lot of those type of years, man. And you could just go years after that, years before that. There's a year where your cornerbacks are Low Wood and Spencer Boyd. And now you look and you're like, Cree Thomas would have been the dude in that class. Legitimately the dude in that class. Legitimately like, oh my gosh, I'm fired up about Cree Thomas. And now like nobody talks about him because of how good Dallas Gold and Mark Zachary are. But I'm telling you folks, Cree is a ball player now. And I called a buddy of mine before the show, and he was another one of those. Because there's certain people I trust that if you tell me you think I'm wrong on a kid, I'm going to go back and evaluate it again with an open mind because I trust your instincts and your results. And so I called one buddy of mine and I said, man, there's 2 dudes that I am the most shocked by how much better they got. And he goes, I know who you're talking about, Brian. I said, okay, you know the 2 of 25. I said, all right, cool, bet. Tell me who they are. One on defense, one on offense. I'm like, okay, he's off to a good start. Defense, Cree Thomas. I'm like, yep, you got it. He goes offense. He goes, he's a pass catcher. And I was like, yeah, you nailed it. He nailed it because we had the same opinion. He liked Cree as a junior, just like I liked Cree as a junior, top 150 guy, probably a little closer to top 200 than top 100. His senior film was really good, Trev, really good. Fluid, speed took a jump. Playmaking took a jump. He's playing corner. He's playing safety. He's returning kicks. And we know the kind of competition he plays because we watched Benjamin Morrison dominated that same high school. Cree went from a top 150 to 200 kid to his grade is like borderline top 100 now. And he's your number 3 corner. Like I see your face when I'm talking about Cree Thomas. So you had the same reaction that I did when you broke down his senior film. Yeah. Like this kid got even better than he was. Yeah. He loved Cree's film. And nobody talks about him because he's been committed for so long and the recruiting rankings don't love him. But this kid is good. He is good, Trev.
Yeah. He's a great football player. And the speed jump to me is what kind of made it eye-popping from his junior to senior year because he would close on the football well his junior year, but the speed is what, like, it literally turned those into interceptions. Like, literally, like,
it's a great way of putting that, Trev. So balls he would have broke up last year,
Yeah.
Now he's stepping in. Or balls he would have hit the guy as soon as he caught it. Now are breakups. That's a great point.
Yeah, because he's just that step or two quicker. And that's what, to me, that's what showed like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your junior year, you were good. Like
Yes.
you were a good corner. Your senior year, now you are okay. Okay. I see you. Mm-hmm.
Then you got the other two kids. And you've got Mark Zachary, who, again, I had as a top 100 kid when they signed him. Mark Zachary's had a very interesting evolution for me as a football player. When I first saw a sophomore film, I liked it. I didn't love it. I saw a smart kid, a really fluid athlete. Like he looked like a point guard playing cornerback, which is exactly what he is. He led his high school team to a state championship. But I was like, okay, good play. This is like the traditional good corner that Notre Dame landed. This is the Julian Love type. This is the guy that and Julian Love ended up being a heck of a player at Notre Dame. But like, what hurt Julian going to the National Football League? Not real fast. Good, really good athlete. More twitchy and quick than fast. Smart, try hard, tough kid, all that stuff. That the Cole Luke types, right? Like maybe not like high level NFL guys, but and that's what Mark was as a sophomore. And then as a junior, he got better. Graded him out as a top 100 guy, like bottom of the probably like 90 to 120-ish type of range is where I kind of had Mark as a junior film. Really good two-way player in high school, really good cover guy, more of an athlete than he was necessarily a football player. Now, instinctively, he was a good football player. Technically, is where he needed a lot of work, but just a really good high school football player. What's sad is his senior year, he played on a far worse team, but he was way better. Like they were state champs as a junior, and then this year, I think they're losing record, but he was way better, like way better. He got stronger. He got faster. He was more dynamic athletically. He was more of a playmaker, dominant receiver. Like Mark Zachary could play receiver at Notre Dame. I don't know that he'd be like a high-level receiver, but he could play a receiver at Notre Dame. And then you talk about like he's super long. He's 6 foot, a little skinny, but he's a strong kid for his size. You hear everything anyone, and I don't know if you have anything to add to this, if you know anybody that knows him, but like the people that I talk to that connect down in Indy, they say this kid's like football IQ and more so leadership and character are just top shelf. Like this is the kind of kid that will be a captain for you someday. And that's why he's the point guard on the basketball team and the captain on the football team and all those type of things. This kid has got a lot of that stuff, but he's also he's not like sometimes when you say that smart kid, high football IQ, try hard guy, you're thinking, oh, well, he's probably not very athletic then, huh? Like when you start talking about character, it's like, okay, sure, he's going to be a captain, but he's going to be that captain that you hope isn't starting.
Yeah.
That's what makes Mark so unique. It's because he's got all that, but he's also a really good athlete. And he turned into a really good football player by his last 2 years to where he's now an easy top 100 guy for me now. And that's your number 2 in this class, Trev.
Yeah. I mean, there's just something when you look at Mark Zachary and what he does on the football field, for whatever reason, the football just finds him or he just finds the football. I mean, it's, just every fumble just kind of bounces his way. I mean, he does a really good job of high pointing the football for a corner. To your point about how he could go and play wide receiver, he has really good ball skills as a corner. But no, everything that I've heard about him is in the same boat. He's very well spoken. He's a very smart kid. He's a genuine kid. So excited for him to be at Notre Dame. I mean, and again, to your point, he's the second best corner in this class, which is nuts.
It's like, let's look at his production from this season. And it's insane to me that some of these recruiting services dropped him in the rankings. Rivals dropped him completely out of their top 2. And they've done so many good things in the last couple of years, but they've had some bad misses this year. On3 has him at number 111. That's the very bottom of what I would find acceptable. 247 has at 175, ESPN at 220. This kid is closer to top 50 than he is top 150, in my opinion. But then you look at his senior year production, Trev, and he is, as a senior, he had 62 tackles, 8 interceptions, 4 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, 2 blocked punts, and 2 defensive touchdowns. And, oh, by the way, he did that while teams avoided him. Did I mention that he had 8 interceptions as a guy that people didn't throw at that much? And then Trev, he had 58 catches for 1,036 yards and 12 touchdowns. This is like, and it's funny because like Christian Gray was a lot like that for me.
Yeah.
Liked him early, didn't love him, and he just got better and better every year. And then by the time he was a senior, like, this is a dude. And that's how Mark Zachary is. Like, Mark Zachary would probably be the number 1 cornerback in a Notre Dame class every year in the last 20 years, except with the exception of 3 others. This one, the year that Christian Gray signed, and the year that Benjamin Morrison signed on my grading system. Before that, I don't know that Notre Dame signed a better corner than him. The closest that you could find is if you go back to, I loved Darren Walls coming out of high school back in 06. Darren Walls was a dude.
Yeah, he was.
But he grades out better than all those guys. Except since Darren Walls in 06, I'll say he would have been the number 1 cornerback in every single class until the Morrison class, the Gray class, and then this year with Dallas Golden. And if you were to say, hey, Brian, I'm gonna argue with you. I think Mark Zachary's better than Dallas Golden as a corner. I'd say, all right, I'm not gonna argue with you on that. I take Dallas, but my feeling of Dallas is you could argue that Christian right now or Mark right now is a better corner than Dallas Golden right now. I think Dallas is the better football player.
Yeah.
And once he starts specializing on one position, then I think his game's going to take off. But if you were to say today, December 4th, Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden, if they both played cornerback, Mark would be the better player. It's okay. We could debate that if you want, but I'll just say, okay, I'm not going to, I don't think so strongly about it that I'm going to argue with you about it. Like, well, okay, you might have a point. I think Dallas is better, but Mark, that's how good Mark Zachary has become as a football player for me. Because you know how much I like Dallas Golden.
Oh, yeah.
And that leads us right into the number one cornerback in this class, which is Dallas Golden. This is a special football player. I've said this before. This kid could start at Notre Dame at 7 different positions.
Yeah.
Field corner, boundary corner, nickel, field safety, boundary safety, running back, and slot receiver. Yeah. Yeah. That's a special football player. Now, specifically about corner, Dallas needs a lot of technical work at corner. He's going to need a lot of experience at corner. That's why it would not shock me if early on they have him in the slot. Because I think his skill set, he's a 6 foot, 180, 185 pound kid. He's a guy that's a really tough running back. He's fast. He's incredibly elusive. He's very athletic. He's a guy that you look at, Trev, and you're just like, this guy's just a great football player. You're like, where do you want to play him? Wherever he wants to play. That's where you play Dallas Golden. I just personally like him more at corner because I think his upside is greatest at corner. That's how I feel about him. And when you look at the production, the kid's just been a heck of a football player, heck of a productive football player in his career. A guy that's ran for over 3,000. I'm going to pull up his yard. I believe he's been over 3,000 yards the last 2 years rushing. He's a kid that makes a lot of plays defensively. He makes plays in the return game. Let me see here. So yes, rushing. So Dallas Golden has actually been over 1,000 yards each of the last 3 years. In the last 3 years, Dallas Golden rushed for 3,908 yards in Tampa, Florida at Berkeley Prep. Averaged 7.2 yards per carry. 17 games of over 100 yards, 47 touchdowns. Also, over the last 3 years, he's caught 74 passes for 980 yards, 13.2 per catch, and 11 touchdowns. He's had at least one catch of over 50 yards each of the last 3 years. That's his offensive production. You know what I mean? Like, this is a kid that's got a lot of talent, a lot of tools. He's also a kid that last year was over 25 yards per kick return, and this year was over 12 yards per punt return. This is a special football player, Trevor. And as a corner, he's going to need a lot of work. And that's why I think putting him in a slot could be good because you're playing a little bit tighter area. It's a little bit more of a physical game. You don't have as much ground to cover. Let him learn that and then maybe work on him outside. They may go the opposite and start him outside and then let him learn and then move him inside. Don't really care. The reality is this kid can play. I wish he was an early enrollee. That's my only bummer. But, Benjamin Morrison wasn't an early enrollee, and he was a dude. If you're a dude, you're a dude. You're going to have all summer. You're going to have June, July, all that time to get to learn stuff and get acclimated. But this kid is it's a special football player. Loose hips, strong. Doesn't look it because he's not a real thick kid, but he's really strong. Easy athleticism, great balance, and a lot faster than you think he is. And I remember talking to my buddy John Garcia, who liked this film and seen him in live. He's like, but I really want to see him at camp. I want to see what he looks like just playing corner at camp. And John was like, yep. He was that good because he went to the Rivals 5-Star Challenge. Lot to learn technically, but it's not to the point where it bothers me because, number one, Mike Mickens is the corners coach in Notre Dame. But number two, Dallas is it's one of those things where when a kid does this much, he's not going to be a technically proficient player, but he'll learn it real fast. And that's who Dallas Golden is. This is a top 50 football player. He grades out as a 4.5-star player for me with 5-star upside. He's that good. He's that good of a player. And so you've got him, you've got Mark Zachary, you've got Cree Thomas. They're excellent players. It's a talent, but here's the best part about it, Trevor. You can play these three kids together and not moving one of them to safety. You could put Mark in the boundary and put Cree at field and Dallas at the nickel. You could put Mark in the boundary and Dallas or Mark in the slot, Dallas in the boundary. You could put Cree in the boundary and Mark to the field and Dallas any three of those combinations. There's going to be one that they probably like the best, but I proposed two different scenarios to a source I have, goes to the program, and they're like, yep, those are exactly kind of what we're thinking. It's just this, we'll try them all out a little bit and see who's most natural here. But that's what they loved about this trio. And they did it on purpose. They wanted guys that could play together. You don't have 3 field corners, 3 boundary corners. You have kids that can play all of them. So that way, whoever's ready the fastest can play wherever. And that's important because if you have 3 really good corners, but they all kind of play at one position, then,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead, Trev.
I was just going to say, it was just more on the lines of Dallas Golden. I mean, that kid is insane. Like I said at the start of the show, I'm not really that versed in recruiting yet, but he has been somebody that I've been watching for a while, and he is nuts. I mean, legitimately, if he chose to be recruited as a receiver, he would have been a top receiver recruit. If he would have chosen to be a running back,
it's a 4-star.
He would have been. I mean, it's crazy because sometimes you hear about the guys who it's well, I was a 2-way player in high school. It's like, well, you were just the most athletic guy on your team. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes. Like I played corner as a senior in high school just because I was the best athlete.
Yeah.
We had for that. I was corner.
Yeah. I mean, we had guys for us that would play, running back and safety because they were just more athletic than the people that only played safety. You know what I mean? But Dallas Golden is a guy that if he would have chosen to do it, like the intangibles that he has as a football player, like he was a good wide receiver.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was a great running back.
I want to say this too, because this gets said a lot, Trev. Well, I want to play him. No, you don't play him on offense. He's a corner. He needs to learn corner. Well, what about having him play both? Here's the one thing about Dallas. Somebody asked me this, I think on the board or in a private message, I can't remember. So would you try him at let him be a 2-way player like Champ Bailey and Travis Hunter? I said, no. Dallas is an excellent athlete, but he's not the kind of truly elite 4-3, just you can make up for mistakes because you're just so fast type of athlete that Champ and Travis Hunter are. So they could erase technical mistakes because they were just elite speed guys. I don't think that's what keeps Dallas from being a 5-star.
Yeah.
Is he's fast, but he's not Travis Hunter, Champ Bailey fast. And that's why I'd be real nervous about, having him try to be 2-way player because he needs to be more technically proficient. Like one of the questions I was asked in the chat, and it's a great question, said, how would you rank players coming out of high school between Dallas, Benjamin Morrison, and Christian Gray? And my answer is, as high school players, it would, as far as like athletes, it'd be Dallas, Christian, Benjamin. As far as who's the better corner, it's Benjamin, Christian, Dallas. As the all-around football player, it's Dallas, Christian, Benjamin. What makes Benjamin Morrison so special, he's a very good athlete, but he's not an elite athlete. Benjamin is his football IQ is exceptional.
Yeah.
And he's smooth and fluid and long and smart, and his instincts are outstanding. Benjamin Morrison is not if he's eventually a future top 10 NFL draft pick or 15 or 20, it'll be because the athleticism finally got there. But what gets him on people's radar is he is a brilliant football player. He doesn't have Christian Gray's. If he had Christian Gray's athleticism, he'd be a no-brainer top 10 pick. If Christian Gray had Benjamin's football IQ and discipline and all those and feel for coverage, he would be even better. Christian's an elite athlete, still learning the finer points of the game. Benjamin showed up as one of the most advanced mental, technical corners you're going to see. Dallas is more like Christian. Big-time athlete, loads of potential, but the technical part of the game is very much a work in progress. Benjamin also played a lot less two-way than those two guys did. So Benjamin could focus on playing corner, and his dad played in the National Football League as a defensive back. It's kind of like Joe Alt. So he had a little bit of that advantage there. That doesn't take anything away from Benjamin. That's what I loved about Benjamin. That's why I told everyone this kid's a 4-star top 100 guy with 5-star upside.
Yeah.
And my only concern about Benjamin was what's his top level speed, and he needed to get stronger. That's what kept him from being, a 5-star early on. But he had the 5-star upside. With Christian, it was he's got all the athletic tools. He's got to learn the finer points of the position, and that's where Dallas is too. So he needs to learn that. He needs to learn the technical part of the game. He needs to spend that time on that. That's where he needs to be. And when he gets there, he's going to have a chance to be a very, very special player. Very special player.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a resounding A for
easiest A grade I've ever given in my life for a Notre Dame position group.
Love it. Love to hear that.
Yeah.
So let's transition over to the final level of this defense, and it's the 2025 safety class. What are your thoughts, impact on the 2025 class? Let's hear it.
It's another A. It's an A class that, excuse me, it's an A. I wrote down A earlier, but as I've kind of reevaluated it, I'm bumping it down to an A minus, just because I do have some, like the third guy is just not as good at safety as the third guy is at corner. And whoever you view that to be, whether that's Brandon Logan or whether Jadon Blair is flat out as good as anybody that Notre Dame signed in this class. Him and Dallas Golden are just right there, top players in this class. But Mark Zachary is definitely better than Brandon Logan, and Cree Thomas is better than Ethan Long by a decent amount. So I can't give them the same grade as I think through it. So I'm actually going to bump it down to an A minus when I release my grades, like written out later tonight. But it's still outstanding. And the thing at corner that I didn't mention, part of the reason they got an A grade is you also met your numbers needs. You needed 3. You needed 3 safeties in this class, in my opinion. They wanted 2, but I felt the need was 3. And eventually they came around to needing 3 as well. It would have been nice to have Ivan Taylor. Sure, I get all that. But I like the kids they landed. Jadon Blair, we'll start with him. He's the best player in the class. 6'4", 190, smooth, great leaper, instinctive, covers a ton of ground. You watch him run and you're like, how fast is he really? Because he's like that long-limbed guy. And then you watch him chew up ground and you're like, oh, yeah, he's pretty fast. You watch him it's like, oh, that crossing route, they might get him. And then all of a sudden, Jadon just turns it on and he just blows it up, Or at receiver, you're like, I don't know how good of a release that was off the line. And then you're just like watching him just pull away from a guy because he's just so long-limbed. It's kind of hard sometimes to tell just how fast he is, but he can run. He can leap. So he's a really good basketball player, smart football player, studies the game, great work ethic, humble kid, but also a kid with some swagger, that's what makes him a Notre Dame fit. Is he's intellectual, he cares about academics, he's a smart. I mean, like if I should send you the interview I did with him earlier in the year, And you're like, that's a high school kid? That's what you'd say. Because that's what Sean said to me. Because Sean actually wrote the article. I sent him the interview that I did, and Sean wrote the articles. Super smart kid, super mature kid. We had him on the show, and you listen to his mom and dad, and you're like, oh, okay, now I get why he's that way. You know, his mom was like super sharp. Dad is super sharp. But he's also has some swagger to him. He's not that – he's humble, but he's humble in that he doesn't need to tell you how good he is. He's going to show you how good he is. And that's where the swagger comes from. He's not really that, let me go tell everybody how great I am. I'm the greatest of all time. He's like, no, I'm going to put in the work. And then when we get on that field, we're going to strap it up. I'm going to show you how good I am. And I love that type of mentality. And Dallas Golden's a lot like that. Mark Zachary's a lot like that. Cree Thomas. None of these guys are talkers. They're not like active on social media. I mean, Jadon's the most active, and he's not. His dad's way more active on social media than Jadon is. You know what I mean? But he was one of the guys also behind the scenes that was really working as sort of the leader of this class to help get guys into class and all that kind of stuff. He was of the recruits. He played probably the biggest role in helping to get Madden back in the fold. Jadon, but do you see that on Twitter? No, you don't. He did it behind the scenes. He did it communication, me and you. Let's build a relationship, not the phony. Let me show everyone how much of a leader I am. That's how CJ Carr was. CJ Carr almost never tweeted. He'd tweet every now and then at players. But CJ was the ringleader of that class because CJ was on the phone. He was texting. He was DMing. He was here every time a big-time kid was here, building that relationship. And that's what Jadon did for his class as well. You didn't see it, but he was doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm not giving you a top 50 grade because you're a great leader. I mean, it's an intangible, but you could be a 3-star and be a great leader.
Sure.
You know, you could be a guy that's playing the Division III level and you're a great leader. Do you have elite talent? And Jadon's got big time talent. He's athletic. He's smart. He can play. He plays both ways. He's got all the tools, and he's a very and he developed a lot as a football player. If you go back and watch his sophomore film, he was a basketball player playing football. He was just running around. Let me go find the ball. See ball, hit ball. I mean, there wasn't great instincts. There wasn't great technique. And then as a junior, you're like, okay, he figured out how to be a football. And then as a senior, it's like, yeah, okay, that's the dude. That's the dude right there. And so Jadon Blair is a very special. And then you put a kid like him who can play both safety spots. And then you've got Dallas and you've got Cree and you've got Mark Zachary. That alone right there is an A secondary class.
Yeah.
Because you could move Cree to safety if you needed to and say, all right, we're good. You could move Dallas to safety and Dallas could be a 4-year starter at safety. But then you throw in, they got Brandon Logan and Ethan Long as well. You know, Brandon Logan jumped up as a senior to a 4-star top 250 grade kid on my board. And I believe, I could be wrong on this one, but I actually believe, I thought there was 1 or 2 recruiting services. Yes. On3 jumped him up to a 4-star player. So they actually saw the jump there. I would grade him a little bit higher than that. I had him as a top 250 guy. Still learning the game, but he took a big jump on how to play the game this season. And he's always going to be I think he's going to also play baseball at Notre Dame. So he's going to always kind of do that. But kid can hit. He's instinctive. He's got good speed, really good speed, a lot better speed than I thought he was going to have.
Yeah.
Footwork has got a lot better this year, which allowed him to transition a little bit better. This ended up being a really good pickup. He now is my number 2 graded safety in the class. As I mentioned, Ethan Long, grade didn't he's still a 4-star, but he went down a little bit because I just didn't see the athletic jump that I hoped that I was going to see. But he's a super smart. He's that kid that you praise because of how smart he is and how hard he works and instinctive he is and all that, because he needs to be, because he's not a top level athlete. He's smooth, but he's missing that gear right now. I thought he was going to kind of get that as he gets older, and he still might. He just didn't do it as a senior. He may get to Notre Dame and get with Lauren Landau, and that now all of a sudden he is running a 4.5. But he's probably a 4.6-ish kid right now. Smooth, fluid, instinctive, ton of interceptions in his career. I mean, I think he's close to 20 picks in his high school career. And the only reason he's not there is because they just don't throw at him anymore. I think he had 10 interceptions as a sophomore, something crazy like that. Very instinctive kid, very smart kid. But when you talk about transitioning to the next level, he's going to need to find that gear a little bit to go from a guy that right now is sort of rotation guy early that becomes a junior, senior year starter. If he wants to be a little bit more than that, it'll be because if he's more than that, it'll be because getting with Lauren Landau, he gets a little bit more juice. That'll be the reason why he maybe passes that up a little bit. Now, the good news is Ethan and Jadon's a super early enrollee, meaning he's going to be on campus in a week.
Yeah,
and he's going to be able to practice with them during the bowl season or the playoff season. Ethan, I think, is more of a true early enrollee. That's going to be important for him, that he's going to be on campus in the spring because he'll need that weight room time to get stronger and hopefully get a little bit more juice. And if he can figure that out, then his grade jumps up. But I love the talent. I love the instincts. I love the football IQ. I love all that stuff. He just needs to – he's lacking a step. That's what keeps him from really taking that next step as a prospect.
So real quick question here then. More times than not, would you say – because we've talked a lot about some kids in this class that have to kind of get a little faster, kind of work on that next step. More times than not, would you say that when somebody gets into, a collegiate weight training program, are they able to find it, or is it more 50-50? What do you think?
What do you mean? Explain that to me again.
If we talked a lot about just different players in this class needing to get that extra step, like for a guy like Ethan Long, you were hoping he was going to take like that next step athletically and kind of get a little bit faster. Hopefully that's going to be something that is found in Notre Dame's training program. Yeah. So would you say more times than not, do they find it, or is it more subjective person to person?
Well, it's usually, you can see certain body types in like the skinnier kids. Like you think of like a Will Fuller, for example.
Yeah.
They're playing sports year round. They're playing basketball. They're running track. They're not in any kind of committed strength program.
Right. And
so then you get to college and your nutrition changes. You add a little bit of muscle. You get into that in that program, and what it does is it focuses more on the lower body, where a lot of kids in high school focus on the upper body because I want to look good at the pool or at the beach or whatever. You get into college and it's about the powerful stuff that you do in the lower body, and that's where that extra juice comes from. And some kids you look and say, well, I don't think that kid has an extra gear in there. But some kids you look at and you say, I think there's an extra gear in there. And I think there's an extra gear in there a little bit for Elijah Burris. I think there's a little bit of an extra gear in there for Ethan Long. I don't know that there's an extra gear in there for Tabron Benny Powell from what he is. I don't know if there's an extra gear in there from, for some other guys. It's like they're always going to be kind of what they are. Everybody gets a little faster usually when they get to college because they get in the strength program.
Sure.
I'm talking about the guy that goes from running a 4.6 to a 4.48. It's kind of, or a 4.45. Will Fuller goes to the opening out in Oregon for senior year and runs a 4.53, I think is what it was. Because I remember it clear as day because I remember being out there covering it, and they're reading off the times of all the former guys that are now, great college players or NFL guys. And I remember laughing when they read Will Fuller was like a 4.53, and I'm thinking that
crazy,
And Will Fuller even said, I wasn't this fast in high school. But he was athletic. You could see the gear. You could see the potential where like this kid gets in a strength program and they start focusing on building up the core and building up the lower body. Now all of a sudden that 4.53 becomes a 4.4, and that's kind of where I see Ethan. Now I don't see that in every guy. I don't know that every guy's got that. Oh, I think he's got a couple tenths in there to take off. It's not true of every guy.
Sure.
It is true for some guys. And I think and some of it's wishful thinking. Like with Jerome Bettis Jr., it's not that I think he's got that gear in him. It's I hope he has that gear in him.
Right.
And there's a difference between Ethan Long and Jerome Bettis. Ethan Long, I think that gear's there based on evaluating it and seeing kids like him make a similar jump in college. Then there's other guys you're just like, I don't know if he's really got it in there, and hopefully I'm wrong. So it's more about you evaluate it and you see certain things that make you think that kid's got something left.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at with that.
So to kind of tie this all together, Brian, what is your overall grade then for this defensive class for 2025?
It's an A-. The only reason I didn't give it an A is because I want the D-line class to be a little bit better. It's got A upside, but I needed that D-line because that's such an like if the D-line class was like an A and the linebacker class was a B, so you just flip those two grades, I'd say that's an A defensive class. Because I don't need the linebackers to be an A. If I got an A D-line and I got A corners and A minus safeties, you know what I'm saying? But the D-line can't be a B or a B minus, and your defense is going to still be pretty good, but not as good as it could be if you had an A defensive line and a B minus safeties or B minus linebackers. You're still going to be really good on defense because you're A at corner and you're A on the D line. You're going to be a really good freaking defense, even if you have B linebackers. So that's kind of where I'm at. Is like there's not that, maybe Burgess can become that guy. Hopefully but I don't. Who's that? Maybe I'd feel differently if Gordy would have played his senior year and made the jump that I thought he was capable of. I might feel a little bit different if they'd have landed a Marco Jones, but like that D line haul, which is good, but not as good as it needs to be, is what drags it down to an A minus. But A at linebacker, A at corner, A minus at safety. That's really freaking good.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trade this. Even if it meant I'm getting a better D line haul, I honestly wouldn't. I don't know that I'd trade this defensive class with anybody. This is one of the 3 or 4 best defensive classes in the country on defense. It's special. And I wouldn't trade this secondary class with anyone.
No, not at all. And
I might even disown you as a friend if you were a coach for another team and say, let's trade. Like, don't ever call me again. Dude, I was in your wedding. You were in mine. I don't care. You said I can't ever trust you again with that nonsense that you just said to me.
You were in my wedding. Well, good thing that was a while ago, bud.
Yeah. Didn't work out, did it? No, I'm just kidding. But like it's a special defensive back class.
I mean,
it really is.
End of the day, man, if we're talking about something pushing it down from an A to an A minus, we're in a pretty good spot. We're in a really good spot as analysts to be able to talk about this team that Notre Dame is bringing on. And
what's interesting, Trevor, is I found and this is I think I like to let people kind of know what's going on in my head and how I've evolved. And I honestly feel like as I've gotten deeper into the Marcus Freeman era from a grading standpoint, I think I've gotten more critical of the grading because he's changed the bar. This staff, him and Chad Bowden, they've changed the bar to where now it's like, in order to get an A, it needs to be really good. Mm-hmm. I probably would have given this safety class an easy A 3-4 years ago. I might have given this D-line class a B plus or an A minus for just, and it's not an intentional thing, but it's almost like the bar was set so low that you just you viewed a class like this as like, oh my gosh, this is so much better than what we've seen the last 5 or 6 years that you almost kind of overinflated it a little bit. Where now it's like, yeah, I mean, there's no Boubacar in this group. There's no, Bryce. There's no this potential top 15 NFL draft pick in this. You know what I mean? And it's like, It's completely changed the bar. And I just, and to the point where I'm instead of giving an A, I've given it. It's not like I'd have given it a B minus now, and it would have given it an A 5 years ago. It's like I would have given it an A, but now it's like A minus, B plus. I'm just because of the way that the bar has been risen with this coaching staff, and I'd like to. That's more defensively. I'd also say that.
Sure.
I think, but just overall, though, I'd say that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean it's very valid, man. I mean, that's what we get into the conversations about those elite programs, is when you're able to, retain the kind of talent that Notre Dame is able to and attract the kind of talent Notre Dame is able to, especially on the defensive side of the football. You kind of have to be, right? Or else every single recruit, every single player that's coming in that's exciting and has had a really good high school career, you're handing out A plus grades like you're Oprah Winfrey. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it's a good spot to be in, man. It really is. It really is. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up. We do have a couple super chats.
Well, Vince is going to be super pissed at you right now.
Uh-oh.
What did you forget?
I don't know what
we got to talk about the special teams grade, man.
We'll make sure when we edit it, we'll cut out this part.
Well, Vince does the editing, so you're screwed no matter what. So
I'm going to call him
man.
and compliment him on. I don't think there's ever been a better dean of students at Penn High School. But look,
there you go.
So,
go ahead, Trev.
I was going to say, so now that we've wrapped up the defensive portion, we're going to get into special teams, which is something we cannot forget about. So, Brian, your thoughts on, and it was a late push, but the impact of getting Eric Schmidt in this class?
Huge. And it's huge for a couple of reasons. Number one is I was told as of 3 weeks ago that they were just going to stick in the portal for kickers. And I said at the time, I was like, I don't love that. I don't. But hey, you do you. And I don't know that everybody was on board with that. I don't know what's changed, but because this kid visited campus, this kid kicked at Notre Dame. Like they've been on it for a while. This is some kid that they discovered. They have one of the best kickers in the country in state. This kid's just a little bit better. And this kid's from Wisconsin. There's another kicker in state that's one of the best kickers in the country, in my opinion. Phenomenal leg kick, multiple 60-yard field goals. They were just going to do the portal.
He's at Northwood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were just going to do the portal thing. And so I was like, whatever. And then like about a week ago, I got a call and be like, oh, by the way, this is going to happen. I was like, seriously? That's a change of shift of focus and emphasis. And then if you're going to go do that and you go out and get the best guy in the country and flip them from Wisconsin, and I don't think it hurt their feelings that they flipped them from Luke Fickell's team. I don't think that was necessarily a thing that doesn't get lost on this coaching staff, right, with some of the issues with Luke Fickell. But what makes him unique, so obviously he's the number one kicker in the country. That's part of it. But the other part of it is he's a very unique kicker because a lot of guys nowadays, there's a lot more specialization now with kicking than there used to be. Kids would kick and punt and kick off. Now it's like you're a kicker or you're a punter. Like I was talking with Vince and his son about this the other day, and they were talking about how, well, that kid's a punter. Well, that kid's a place kicker. Well, that kid kind of does both, but he's not really good at that. And with this kid, they view him as all three: punter, kickoff guy, and a place kicker. Now, that's a bit of an evolution because when he first became sort of this big-time prospect, it was more as a punter and a kickoff guy. He wasn't quite as good as on field goals, but he started to focus on it more. He got. I mean, he's a very thick. He looks like a D1 soccer player. You know what I'm talking about? Like those really ripped up calves, and like they're not real big guys, like 6'1", 210, but they got those really just like ripped up calves and really just like thick trunks, and then like prep school hair. That's Eric Schmidt, right? Like he looks like a D1 soccer player, and that is a compliment. Because he's built like that real strong-legged, kid. And he started focusing more on improving as a field goal kicker and got a lot better this year. And multiple 50-plus yarders. I watched him kick a 48-yarder on film that, like, it probably landed 25, 30 yards past the stick. I mean, the goalposts. And I mean, he's the kind of kid that if you want him to kick every single kickoff into the back of the end zone, he will. And but he made a name for himself initially as a punter. So he's a kid that eventually you could maybe have do all three. And that's a rare thing.
Yeah.
It would not shock me. I told you the intel of this is now my opinion. It would not shock me if they still went out and got a portal kicker this year that was accurate, that in case this kid maybe needs some time to still develop as a place kicker, you can have him do the long ones, and maybe this portal guy is more of the from 40 in and accurate and that type of thing. And then he takes over full-time next year. If Rendell comes back, which I believe right now that's the plan, he'd be the number 2 punter. So it wouldn't shock me if he was like the number 2 at those 2 spots, maybe kicks the long field goals, and he's your kickoff specialist day 1. And then if he figures place kicking out, he can always take over.
Sure.
It would not shock me if that's the route that they went. But the plan is that at some point in time in the very near future, this kid's going to be at least in charge of 2 of those 3, if not all 3. And that's an A. Plus, the other part of special teams is you got a lot of really long athletic safeties and linebackers and corners. So Cree Thomas, Ethan Long, Brandon Logan, let's say that they're not starters on defense someday. They're going to be guys that you're going to want running down on punt coverage and kick coverage. Anthony Sacca, Madden Faramo, Dallas Gold, Mark Zachary also add that value, but usually those top level guys can kind of do that. I mean, there's not a single linebacker, corner, or safety that you look at and say, I don't think that guy could be a really good coverage player on special teams. Then you look at other aspects of it. You've got Antavius Richardson's a real dynamic return man. He might be able to add some return value to you. Dallas Golden's a really good return man. Mark Zachary's a really good return man. So not only did you go out and get your top specific specialists in the country, your coverage units are going to remain strong with this kind of class. And you added some potential playmakers in the return game. So it's not just kicker, punter, snapper. It's also this. Then you signed one of the nation's best snappers last year. Nick, he's already taken over, I believe, long snapping, Joseph Vinci. And he's probably going to be your short and long snapper next year. So that's already locked down. You didn't need that. It wasn't a need for you. And now you bring in the kicker of the present and future. And then you have all these coverage guys and return guys. And you're feeling pretty good about the special teams having the athletes and talent it needs in the future to really rock and roll. And you probably also locked up Notre Dame's next punt blocker / field goal blocker in Christopher Burgess with how long his arms are. I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
That's another role.
Same with Gordy Solstead.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's special teams is looking good. And, I mean, you even talk about, Bryce Young is on the kickoff unit right now.
6'7", 250, and he's running down covering kicks.
God, you want to talk about a job that I would not want to have.
Yeah.
Is being the return man on any unit where Bryce Young is in coverage. That's just.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
That's crazy.
Hard pass. Pass.
Now that is going to do it for the evaluation of the 2025 recruiting class. Before we get out of here, we do have some
and we were going to do the 2-year grades, but we're already 3.5 in. So I texted Trevor that we're going to do that. We'll do those again soon. We'll pick a recruiting time next week where I'll take the 2-year grades. It's just to do that justice, we're going to get way past 4 hours, and that's just a little long for today. Plus, IB Nation Sports Talk is already going on live, so we're already cutting into their time. So we're going to do that another time. So we will do the 2-year grades, but we do have some super chats, Trev.
We do.
Let me do this one real quick from Michael S. Michael, thank you for this. How do you evaluate the D-line recruits? We already broke that down. You put this in before we got to that breakdown, so I appreciate it. I should have brought it up when we started talking about it, but I think we gave you a pretty good breakdown of that. So I wanted to thank you for that super chat, Michael.
Super chat from Casa Hodge. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Brian, Trev, you might have touched up on it, but is linebacker Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng still in play? Thanks, and I appreciate the IB team.
So he put this chat in the first hour before Owusu-Boateng committed to Michigan. So obviously he was not in play. If you're an IB member, you'd have known this right after the Florida State visit. But I put an intel piece out that week that basically said Notre Dame dropped him. And I'm not going to get into reasons why. I talked about it on the board, but Notre Dame decided he wasn't a fit. And so they moved on. And Mad Framo became the only focus for them, a linebacker. And if they missed on him, then they missed on him. They weren't going anywhere else. I mean, so that's why you saw him when he had he put out a top 2 last night of Colorado and Michigan. Notre Dame wasn't in there because Notre Dame wasn't an option anymore for him. So they were not a player for him. That was their choice. I don't know that they would have got him anyway, to be honest with you, but maybe, but they didn't want him. Speaking of, from Lisa Robinson.
Thank you for the super chat, Lisa. Notre Dame is the new linebacker U.
It's hard to, and it's not even just from recruiting. I mean, if you think about it, nobody else in the last 15 years, I believe, has 3 Butkus Award winners. Notre Dame does. You know, when you look at Manti in 2012 and then Jalen Smith in 2015 and then Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in 2020.
Yeah.
You know, you had your 2 starting linebackers from last year, both got drafted in the NFL. And now your linebacking core is even better from a talent standpoint. It's not as experienced and, as last year's group was, but just talent, it's better.
Yeah.
You know, Drake Bowen's probably going to get drafted at some point in time. Madden's going to, Kingston's going to is an NFL player. Jaden Osbury's an NFL player. You know, Jalen Sneed, if he's some team signs him and they've got him on all their special teams, wouldn't shock me. You know, I don't know if he's big enough to be an NFL linebacker. You know, and then you look at Mad Framo's an NFL talent. Anthony Sacca's an NFL talent. I mean, this is nobody's recruiting better. You could say maybe there's teams that are on their same level, but you can't say anyone's better.
Sure.
than what this group has been in recent years. And I didn't even talk about guys like Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak, who are 4-5 type athletes that are just have a lot to learn, but those are good football players too, man. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to argue with that. The results on the field are there. The NFL production is there. The NFL draft production is there. The awards are there. The All-American honors are there, and the film is impressive. So, yeah, they're getting there. If they're not there now, they're getting there. And you almost would be disappointed in Marcus Freeman if his football team was not known as linebacker to you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, isn't that kind of a given?
Yeah.
That you kind of got to make it to that point in time, but he's getting there. I mean, it's all, a lot of this is Mark. I mean, look, Max Bullow's doing a great job. Al Golden is a part of this. Al Golden's Al Golden's quarterback when he was in college. The guy that threw him the game-winning pass when they beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame when Al Golden was the tight end at Penn State was Tony Sacca, who happens to be Anthony Sacca's dad. I mean, so Al Golden played a role in that, obviously, but so did Max Bullough and Marcus Freeman.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you expect a Marcus Freeman-led football team to be really good at linebacker. And guess what? They have been. They recruit there. They produce there. I mean, it's just like you're not going to have Marcus Freeman's football team not be good at linebacker. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
At least it shouldn't happen. And guess what? It hasn't happened. So,
right.
But yeah, that they're definitely getting there.
And then last super chat from Michael S. Thank you for the super chat, Michael. Seemed Greathouse disappeared in the SC game. Reason?
Well, I don't think he did. He just didn't get targeted. He was played a lot. He just didn't get targeted. And they were doing some stuff in the game where they were doing a little bit more 12 personnel in certain looks for matchup reasons.
Yeah.
But no, I just don't think he was targeted. There was just other routes that were there, and they were running down their throat. Blocked really well.
Yeah.
He had a really good game blocking. It's one of his better games of the year blocking.
Yeah.
He just didn't get targeted a whole lot after that early reception, but he played it decent amount. He was in there. So Thank you for that, Michael S. Appreciate you, man.
Well, cool, Brian. I think we're good.
Yeah. Jason Smith, man, it was great to see you back in the chat, man. Great to see you in the chat. We're glad to have you back, man. Glad everything's good with you. Glad to have you. So, and there was one question. Jay Henry asked a really good question because talked about the linebacker or the DB class. Then he said, how would I compare it to Oregon's group? And I thought it was something that was worth kind of mentioning is Oregon's got a really good secondary class. They got Brandon Finney, the kid that Notre Dame recruited, Dorian Brew, who Notre Dame recruited, Trey McNutt, who Notre Dame recruited, and Naeem Offord, who they flipped from Ohio State. That's a very good defensive back class. There's no doubt about it. I like that defensive back class. There's a couple things about it, though. Notre Dame, to me, is deeper, 6-4. That matters. I think Notre Dame's 5 and 6 are really good football players. But when Trey McNutt's a really good football player. He's listed as a 5-star. I don't think he's better than Jadon Blair. Notre Dame also didn't think he was better than Jadon Blair. Dorian Brew's a good football player. He did not progress the way that I hoped he would, and I think he might end up being a linebacker because he got big. So I don't know that he's a pure defensive back anyway. And Naeem Offord's a very good football player. They have him as a 5-star. I would not trade him for Dallas Golden or Mark Zachary. They're all in that same level. So I think they can not – I think Trey McNutt's a tad overrated, but meaning I don't think he's a 5-star. I think he's a top 75 guy. You know what I'm saying? He's still a really good football player. I just don't know that he's 5-star, top 25 type of guy. And I just think Jadon Blair is better than him. I think Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary at the very least are as good as Naeem Offord. I think that, I think Creed Thomas to me is a very comparable prospect to Dorian Brew. And I think that your top 4 guys are all better than Brandon Finney. So for Oregon, if I'm Oregon, I'm thrilled with their secondary class. Thrilled.
Oh yeah.
I'm simply saying, I just think Notre Dame's is better. And, so that's where I'm at. And Ohio State's got a very good secondary class. Even with losing Offord, they still have a very, very good secondary class as well.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't trade it for Notre Dame's. And that's not homer. I'm just telling you, looking at the film. There's some classes I would trade with Notre Dame's at certain positions. Right? I mean, there's some receiver classes you'd be like, would you trade? I'm like, if I could, yeah, I would trade that. No, with all due respect to the kids that they have. But not the DB class. Not the linebacker class, not the O-line class, not the tight end. I'm good. I'm good with what Notre Dame got. Yeah. I'm not kicker, and that's why I say this is a better class than the rankings are going to show. Because there's a lot of classes you say. And does that mean that there aren't others as good? but I'm not trading something as good for something as good. Why would I do that?
Right.
It's like, I'm just not going to do that. Say, hey, I'm going to trade you for Mike Trout in his prime. Would you trade for him? Well, yeah. Well, no, because I've already got Ken Griffey Jr. in his prime. They're both great players, but why would I need to trade him for him? We both have great players already. Why we don't need to trade? We're in the same ballpark. That's how I look at it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, it's not bad for a school that has to recruit out of a certain aisle. That's all I'll say.
That's a great way to end the show.
Thank you.
He's shopping down a different aisle. His aisle just happens to have people from Georgia in it, and Ohio State in it, and USC in it, and Texas in it, and all that kind of stuff. It's definitely, lo and behold, that same aisle still has kids that want to go to class. Imagine that. Still has kids that are academically oriented. Jeremiah Love is one of the most unique kid. Jeremiah Love draws comics. He's a very unique young man. Jeremiah Loves always existed. The Christian Grays, the Benjamin Morrisons, the Leonard Moores that are elite athletes and elite football players that also care about academics and bettering themselves and doing it and challenging. Those kids were always there. You just had to work to get them. You had to work to find them, and then you had to work to get them. And you had to be good at evaluating. That's what was missing before. And then the whole shopping down a different aisle was just a nice, easy, built-in excuse to not have to put in the work. Marcus Freeman's like, we're going to shop down a different aisle. We're going to shop down the same aisle as Georgia. We're going to shop down. Now, there's some things you can't get off the shelves in that aisle. And so what? But there's plenty in there of like, that's a Notre Dame dude right there.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not just a great kid, great academic, but he's a big-time football player.
Oh, yeah.
Those kids you got to work a little harder for. And that's what this staff has done, and that's why we are here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but it's a good spot to be in. It is a good spot to be in. Well, that's going to do it for us today here at the Irish Breakdown Podcast Recruiting Edition. Thank you guys for being with us today as we walked through the 2025 signees. A lot of awesome news coming out today, obviously highlighted by Matt and Framo with the last second signing.
Huge.
Great news.
Huge.
Great news. But you guys know what to do. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on any platform that you watch this show on. Go to boards.irishbreakdown.com so you can see all of the exclusive content that we have coming out. Brian talked about all the intel pieces that he has coming out. It is creeping up on playoff time that he's I mean, it's almost playoff time. There's going to be a lot of great content that's going to be coming out over the next couple of weeks. So make sure you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com to stay in the now. But until next time, for Brian, for myself, we will see you guys back here next time on the Irish Breakdown